She smashed the brass candlestick straight through the glass, then pressed her bleeding hand to the frame and screamed one word down into the courtyard. Harrow. And 8 years of silence broke apart with the pain. Below her stood the man who'd paid a fortune for drawings he never knew she made. Abigail Whitmore tied a folded page to a thread and let it fall. "Catch it," she said, "before my father kills us both." If you're watching, subscribe, stay with me to the very end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far Abigail's story travels. The second blow took the whole pain out. Abigail didn't stop to look at what she'd done. She grabbed the folded page off the floor, tore a length of thread from her sleeve, and had it tied before the last piece of glass finished ringing on the stones below. "You still there?" she called down. "I'm here." A man's voice, steady. "You're bleeding, ma'am." "I know it." "Bad?" "Not near bad enough to matter. Hold out your hands." "Hold on now." "I don't have hold on, Mr. Harrow. I've got maybe a minute before that man puts a key in this door, and if he does, this drawing goes in his fire, and I go back to being dead. Now hold out your hands." She heard him move. She fed the thread out over the sill, inch by inch, her cut hand slick on it, and she leaned as far as the frame would let her without going through it after the page. "You got it." "Almost." "Tell me when." "A little more." A pause. "Got it." She let go. For a second there was nothing but her own breath, and the pull of blood down her wrist. Then below the sound of paper unfolding. "Open it," she said. "I'm opening it." "Turn it the right way. Load tables down the right margin." "I see it." His voice changed on those 3 words. She'd been waiting 8 years to hear a voice change like that. "I see it, ma'am." "Then you know," Abigail said. "You've paid for 2 years of my hand and never once seen my face. Well, here's my face, sir, and here's the hand. Now look me in the eye and ask me the question you came all this way to ask." He looked up. She could see him now, gray coat hat pushed back, a broad, plain face doing arithmetic behind the eyes. "Who drew this?" "I did." "Say your name." "Abigail Whitmore, Judge Whitmore's daughter. The one that died of a fever 8 years ago, if you ask the county." She was crying and didn't care. "Do I look dead to you, Mr. Harrow?" "No, ma'am," he said. "You surely don't." And then the keys. She heard them from the far end of the hall, that thin, cold rattle that had run her whole life, and her body tried to make her small, tried to fold her into the corner the way it had learned to fold. And she caught it. She stood up straight instead. She turned and put her back to the broken window and faced the door. Not this time. The key hit the lock. It always caught at the half-turn. She heard it catch, heard her father swear low behind the oak, heard him force it. The bolt drew. The east wing door opened from the outside for the first time in 8 years. Judge Elias Whitmore filled it, a big man gone heavy, a face the whole county had believed for 30 years, and that face was working hard now to hold itself together and not quite doing it. "What have you done?" he said. "I've opened a window. You've cut yourself, you foolish—" His eyes went to the glass, the blood, the empty thread still tied to the frame, and she watched him count it, watched him reach the end of the sum, and go the color of old tallow. "What did you drop out that window, Abigail?" "Go and see." "What did you drop?" "The warehouse." She let it land. "The Harrow warehouse. In my own hand, the one Silas signed and you got paid for. It's in that man's coat pocket right now, Father, and I don't reckon any amount of brandy's going to talk it back out again." His mouth opened. "Abigail, don't." The word came out flat and whole, and she saw it startle him because she had not said "don't" to him. Not like that, not straight in 8 years. "Don't you tell me I don't understand what I've done. I understand it better than anything I've ever done in my life. You want the girl back that jumped when you turned a key? She's gone, sir. I broke her out the same window I broke." "You will lower your voice." "I've been quiet 8 years. I'm all out of quiet." His hand came up. She'd never seen him strike anyone. He'd done worse than strike. He'd erased her, wiped her name off the county rolls, told her own sister she was too dreadful to look at, but he'd never raised a hand, and he raised one now, an inch too, and Abigail did not move, and did not blink, and let him see her not moving. The hand came down, and from the courtyard up through the broken window, a voice carried into the room, unhurried, pitched so the whole house would catch it. "Judge Whitmore." A beat. "I believe you and I best have a talk." Nathaniel Harrow had been to Whitmore House once in the spring, and had left it sure of two things. First, that Elias Whitmore was proud in the exact way that made a man dangerous proud, not of what he had, but of what folks believed he had. Second, that something in that house was wrong. He couldn't have told you what. He wasn't a man who trafficked in feelings. He trafficked in acres and iron and the depth of a footing, and a feeling didn't go in a ledger. But he'd ridden out of that yard in the spring with the back of his neck cold, and it had gnawed at him for weeks, the way a sum gnaws when it comes out wrong twice, and you can't find where. Now he'd found where. She was hanging out of a broken window 3 floors up, bleeding, telling him her name. He put the drawing inside his coat over his heart and walked in the front door without knocking. The hall was in a boil. A housekeeper, 2 girls, an old man he took for a butler, all of them turning to him with that guilty look of people who failed at a thing they were paid to prevent. "Where's the stair to the east wing?" Nathaniel said. The housekeeper found her voice. "Sir, you cannot just— I rode 140 miles to look at a warehouse I paid $11,000 for. I've just been told the person that drew it lives locked behind a door in this house. So I'll ask you kindly, ma'am, and only once more. Where's the stair?" Nobody spoke. But a young woman, 22-3, in a good dress, both hands pressed white against her mouth, took half a step. She didn't seem to know she was taking, and her eyes cut for one instant to a staircase at the far end that turned up into the dark. "Obliged, miss," Nathaniel said, and touched his hat and went. He met the mother on the stairs. She came down at him like weather all silk and frost, and she planted herself on the narrow tread, with the ease of a woman who has never once been the one to step aside. "Mr. Harrow, I don't recall giving leave for— Your daughter's up there bleeding, ma'am. My daughter is very ill, smooth as a river stone. She has been ill many years, and it grieves us more than I can say. In her fits, she harms herself and the house. What you saw at the window is only the sorrow of it. My husband and I have borne it privately out of love as any family." She lowered me a drawing on a thread. He set it flat. "Warehouse elevations. Load table down the right margin, tidy as a banknote. Now you can keep telling me she's mad, ma'am, and I'll keep listening polite, but I've read plans 20 years, and a mad hand don't draw a true line. That's the truest line I've seen in a year. So one of us is wrong about your girl, and I don't believe it's me." The frost cracked. Under it for just a second, he saw the thing he knew from every hard bargain he'd ever closed. Fear. "You will leave this house," Margaret Whitmore said. "No, ma'am," Nathaniel said, gentle, and went on past her up the stairs. The corridor ran long and dim. Every door down it was sealed shut, with a little gray fringe of dust along the bottom every door, but one at the far end standing open, and in that open door was the judge, and past the judge in the room was the woman. Nathaniel had built his whole life on not being surprised. Surprise was a thing that happened to men who hadn't done their reading. He stopped 4 feet short of the door and was surprised anyway, and let himself be, because some things earned it. She wasn't ruined. She wasn't mad. Too thin, too pale blood drying down one wrist, and ink worked so deep into the side of her right hand that no scrubbing would ever lift it, and she stood in the middle of that bare room with her chin up, like a person who'd been under water a long, long time, and just now broke the surface, and didn't dare yet believe there was air. He took off his hat. His hand did it before his head could argue. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Harrow." Her voice shook, and she pushed straight through the shaking. "You'll want to be quick, sir. My father does a thing. He gets a man alone with a glass of good brandy and a sad story about a poor sick girl, and the man rides off certain of a lie. I've watched it happen from that shutter 8 years. Every decent man who ever came near the truth in this house left carrying my father's version out the door. Don't be the next one. I don't aim to be. Then don't take my word for anything. Take my work. She stepped toward him, not away toward, and he saw her father flinch at it. He'll tell you I copy. That I've a clever little hand for tracing what real men make. So test me. You, not him. Ask me anything you please about that warehouse, and watch whether I answer like a woman who traced it or a woman who built it. Abigail, the judge tight. That will do. She didn't turn her head a hair. The Lofts carried on King Post's Mr. Harrow, not Queen. Ask me why. Nathaniel looked at her a long moment. Then, quiet eyes never leaving hers, he asked the question that turned both their lives. Why King Post's then, and not Queen? Behind him the judge made a sound low in his throat. Abigail answered. She answered a long while. She spoke of the span and the load and the green weight of grain sitting up in that loft after harvest, of how a Queen Post truss would have wanted a longer tie beam than the honest timber in that county could give of the knot she'd found in the third sample beam, and how she'd redrawn the whole loft in a single night rather than trust a beam she couldn't see the heart of. She spoke of water and weight and the plain meanness of a river in flood. She spoke the way a body speaks of the one thing it was put on this earth to do, not showing off. Never that only true. One true thing set next to another till they stood up into a building, and somewhere in the middle of it, Nathaniel Harrow quit hearing a defense and started hearing a colleague, and somewhere past that, he quit being able to pretend he'd ride out of this house tonight and forget her. When she finished, the room was still. Well, Nathaniel said. His voice wasn't quite level, and his voice was always level. Judge Whitmore, your daughter just told me more true things about my own warehouse in 5 minutes than Silas Pemberton's told me in 2 years. Mr. Harrow, I must protest. Pemberton, who I've paid, who signed, who... His face changed, remembering. Who couldn't tell me last April why that loft was framed the way it was. Got red in the neck, and told me a real man of business don't trouble himself with a carpenter's arithmetic. He let that sit in the room. That's the phrase he used, and all the while it was her arithmetic, and you sold it to me, and you had her up here so she couldn't say so to my face. You will not stand in my house, and I haven't accused you yet. Nathaniel's voice dropped, and got worse for dropping, because there was nothing in it a man could grab hold of. I mean to look at your ledgers, and send for the plans Pemberton filed with the county in his own hand, and lay them beside hers. And I mean to do it slow and careful and legal, because I was raised to, and because I want it to hold when it's done. He looked at the judge dead on. You were the law here 30 years. You know it's the man who buries a thing in a hurry that hangs for it. So we go slow. And slow starts with your daughter not spending one more night behind that door. She is unwell. Then let a physician see her. In a lit room. Door open. He tells me she's mad. I'll beg your pardon and ride home and never say another word. He looked at Abigail. But I don't reckon he will. And I don't reckon you do either, Judge. That's just exactly what you're scared of. Abigail watched her father's face. She'd studied that face her whole life, the way another child learns letters. The performing face, the counting face, and the fourth face, the rare one, the one that came out only when he was truly afraid she'd seen it maybe 4 times in 27 years. And she saw it now, and something in her chest that had been clenched 8 years came dangerously loose. She had frightened him. After 8 years of being the thing he controlled, she'd become the thing he couldn't. Clara, she said. The name came without a plan. She'd caught a glimpse of her sister in the first uproar, white-faced at the bottom of the stairs, hands to her mouth, and Clara's face had not been the face of a girl who knew. It had been the face of a girl learning something. In the same breath, Abigail broke the window. Clara, she said louder to the corridor, to the listening house. Clara, are you down there? Quiet. Then a tread on the stair. Abby. A voice she hadn't heard say her name in 8 years. Thicker now, a woman's and not a girl's. Abby, is it are you? Come up, Abigail said. Come up and see the sick, mad, ruined thing they've kept in the attic. Come look at my face and tell me what you see." "Abigail," her mother sharp from the doorway. "You will not—" But Clara was already climbing. She came up out of the dark into the hall, 23 years old. Their mother's fine bones and their father's honest coloring. And she stopped at the top and looked down the long, dim corridor at the open door, and the woman standing in it, and her whole face came apart. "Your face," she whispered. "Abby, your face is fine." She said it like an accusation, like a wound. "Mother said every year, she said you couldn't be looked at. She said it'd frighten me. She said there's nothing wrong with your face. There was never—" "No," Abigail said, gentle now. "There was never anything, Clara. Except I could draw. That was the whole of my disease." Clara crossed the corridor. She went past her stunned father and her frozen mother and the stranger with the hat in his hands, and she took her sister's ink-stained, blood-marked hand in both of hers and pressed it to her wet cheek. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I swear to you I didn't know." "I know you didn't." Abigail put an arm around her sister's shaking shoulders, and over the bowed head looked at Nathaniel Harrow. "You see, sir, that's why the door stays open. Not for me, I've lived behind it 8 years, I could do 8 more. But she was 11. They used my locked door to teach a little girl that a clever woman's a dangerous thing you fold away and hide. You can get the money back. You can't give her back the 8 years she spent believing her own sister was a monster." Her voice held level. "So the door stays open. For every Clara in this county watching some clever aunt or cousin get quietly put away and told it's for the family's good." Nathaniel stood there with his hat against his chest and looked at the two of them and at the ruin in the judge's face and the ice going to water in the mother's. And he understood that the money and the warehouse and the 2 years of drawings signed in the wrong hand had only ever been the door he was meant to walk through to get here. "Judge Whitmore," he said, not turning, "I'll take a room at the inn in town tonight out of courtesy. I'm a guest in your county, and I'll act like one." He set his hat on. "But I'll be back at first light with my solicitor and a physician and a clerk from the county office that owes me a favor and knows right where the filed plans are kept. And your daughter will receive me in a lit room with that door standing open, or I'll want to know the reason why." "We square, Judge." The judge said nothing. "Judge Whitmore, are we square?" "We are," said Elias Whitmore. And it came out of him like a man setting down a weight he'd carried so long it had broke something in him that wasn't coming back. Nathaniel turned. He looked at Abigail one more time, the sister in her arms, the ink in her skin, the terrible, careful hope in her eyes that she was plainly fighting not to feel, because hope had cost her the most of anything. "Miss Whitmore, I'll see you in the morning." "Mr. Harrow?" She looked at him a long beat, then said the smallest, most dangerous thing she owned, the thing she'd folded away years ago, along with her don't and her wanting. "Thank you for opening the door." He touched his hat and went. They did not sleep that night, the sisters. Abigail had thought Clara would be led away, that the mother would come and pry them apart, and the door would swing shut again the instant Harrow's carriage cleared the gate. But the mother didn't come. Nobody came. And after a long while sitting on the floor with their backs to the cold plaster, Clara lifted her head off her sister's shoulder and said the thing that had clearly been building in her since the top of the stairs. "Tell me what they did." "Clara?" "No, don't, Clara, me. I'm not 11. Her voice went hard, and Abigail heard their father in it, that same iron only turned now to the opposite use. 8 years I mourned you. I put flowers where they told me you were Abby. There's a stone in the churchyard. It has your name on it." Abigail sat very still. "There's a stone, with your name and a lily carved on it, and taken young mourned always." Clara was crying again and furious through it. "I have knelt at it. I have prayed at a rock while you were 100 feet over my head drawing bridges. So don't you Clara me, and don't you spare me. Tell me what they did, and tell me why, and tell me all of it, because I have got 8 years to make up, and I mean to start tonight." So Abigail told her. She told it low and plain in the dark, because it was easier in the dark. How it started with the Ashford marriage, old Colonel Ashford's second son, a man of 40 with a temper and a mortgage, and their father's hand already shaken on it before Abigail was ever asked. How she'd said no. How she'd said no again in front of company at the spring assembly, and how their father had smiled through it and got her home and told her a daughter who couldn't be married was of no use to a family and would have to be managed. That was the word he used, managed. "And you drew," Clara said. "Even then. I always drew. You remember. When we were small, I drew you the dollhouse, and Father had the joiner build it, and everyone said what a clever little thing. It was a joke to them then, a pastime." Abigail's jaw tightened. It stopped being a joke the year the pastor's new church went up crooked, and the county surveyor couldn't say why, and I looked at the plans on Father's desk and told him the man had set the footings in fill and not in ground, and I was 14, and I was right, and I never forgot the way Father looked at me. Not proud. Afraid. The same look he had tonight. That's the day the trouble started, Clara. Not the marriage. The marriage was just the excuse. The trouble was that I was right and I was a girl, and he could not have both those things be true in his house. So he locked you up. So he found he had a use for me after all. Abigail's mouth twisted. That's the part I never expected. I thought being managed meant being forgotten. But then a commission came in he couldn't fill. Pemberton had botched a warehouse loft. Father had promised it, there was money owed, and one night the key turned, and Father came in and set a lamp and a roll of paper on the floor and said, "Abigail, Mr. Pemberton requires the elevations by Thursday." And I understood. I wasn't buried up here. I was put to work up here, where nobody could see, and every good thing I made walked downstairs and got another man's name and put money in my father's hand. 8 years. Warehouses. Bridges, the east extension of this very house that Mother shows off to her callers. All of it mine. None of it mine. Clara was quiet a long time. "Why did you draw them?" she said at last. "If you knew, why not refuse?" It was the hardest question, and the honest one, and Abigail loved her sister for asking it instead of pretending. Because the first time I refused, she said, the tray stopped coming 3 days. And the third day, I'd have signed anything drawn, anything said, anything for a cup of water and a heel of bread. So I learned that if I drew, I ate, and the lamp burned, and the paper came, and paper, Clara. You can't know what paper is to a person who has nothing. Paper was a window. A page was a place I could go that they couldn't follow. So yes, I drew their thefts. I drew them beautiful. And I told myself the work was still mine, even if the name never was, because the work was true, and a true thing belongs to whoever made it true, whatever a signature says. Her voice cracked at last. But I was wrong about that. I know it now. I've known it since the second Harrow said who drew this. A true thing that nobody knows you made isn't yours. It's just another kind of grave. Clara took her hand. "Then we dig you up," she said. "Both of us, starting now." And in the dark, for the first time in 8 years, Abigail Whitmore laughed a short, cracked, disbelieving sound and pulled her sister close, and they sat together till the window paled, and the summer birds started up outside the frame that had no glass in it anymore. Chib. Elias Whitmore did not sleep either. He sat in his study with a lamp and the ledger open in front of him, and he did not read it because he knew every line by heart. He was a man who had spent 30 years on a magistrate's bench watching other men lie, and he had learned the one thing that separated the ones who walked from the ones who hanged. It wasn't the crime, it was the ledger. Every one of them in the end was undone by a book that said in plain ink what their mouths denied. He had such a book, and a New York railroad man meant to read it in the morning. "You should burn it," said his wife from the doorway. He didn't look up. "You know I can't burn it. There's the county's copy of the deposits. Burn mine and it only looks worse. Then alter it. Margaret." Now he did look up. "The man is bringing a clerk who knows where the filed plans are kept. He is bringing a physician." By noon tomorrow, there will be a doctor in this house who has looked at our daughter's face and can swear to a magistrate she was never sick a day. Do you understand what that means? It means, Margaret said, coming in her voice like cut glass, that we tell a different story. She is not sick very well. She is wild, unnatural. A woman who refuses her father's marriage and takes up men's work and cannot be let into society without shaming us all. That story a jury believes as fast as the other. Elias looked at his wife a long moment and felt for the first time in a great many years something close to fear of her. You'd have us call her mad in a courtroom. I'd have us survive Elias, which is more than she seems to want for any of us. Margaret's chin came up. You made her useful. That was your doing, not mine. I told you to marry her off and be done, but you were greedy, and now there's 8 years of that man's money in your book, with another name on top of it, and you want to sit there and be careful and legal. There's no careful left. There's her or there's us. Choose. And Elias Whitmore, who had put men in prison for less than what sat in his own ledger, discovered that he did not after all know which he would choose, and hated his daughter. In that moment, not for what she'd done, but for making him find out. So, Harrow came back at 7, not alone. There was the solicitor, a spare gray man named Coffee, with a document case, and no small talk, and the physician, Dr. Bell, who was young and plainly nervous to be riding up to a magistrate's house on an errand like this, and a lean clerk named Otis, from the county office, who kept looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. 4 men and 2 carriages in the drive by 7 in the morning, which in a county that size meant that by 9 o'clock, every soul within 10 miles would know something was afoot at Whitmore House. Abigail understood the choice her father faced the moment she heard the carriages. She stood at the glassless window and watched the men climb down, and she said to Clara without turning, "He'll try to bar the door. Watch, he'll meet them in the drive and try to send the doctor home." He did. They could hear it faint up through the broken window. Her father's voice magistrate smooth, and then Harrow's flatter. And then a third voice, the doctor's high and uncertain. And then Harrow again, and something in the shape of it, though she couldn't catch the words, told Abigail her father was losing. Bootsteps on the stairs. More than one man. The door was already open, had stood open all night, but Nathaniel Harrow knocked on the frame of it anyway. And that small courtesy that knock on a door that had no reason to be knocked on undid Abigail more than anything her father had ever done. She had to turn away a moment before she could face him. "Miss Whitmore, this is Dr. Bell." The doctor came in red to the ears and could not for a moment meet her eye. "Miss Whitmore, I've been asked to examine." "You've been asked to look at my face and say whether it's diseased," Abigail said. "Go on and look, doctor. I've no fever, no scarring, no palsy, and my wits are my own. But don't take my word. That's the whole trouble with this house. Everyone's asked to take a Whitmore's word. Look for yourself." He looked. It did not take him long. He was thorough to his credit. Pulse eyes the old scar on her arm from a childhood fall. The general starved paleness of her, and when he stepped back, his face had gone from nerves to something else, something that in a decent man turns quick to anger. "Mr. Harrow," Dr. Bell said, and his voice wasn't nervous anymore. "This woman is thin, and she wants sunlight and good food, and there's a fresh cut on her hand that ought to be dressed, and that is the whole of what ails her. There is no illness here. There never was any illness a doctor could name." He turned to the judge, who had come as far as the doorway, and no further. "Sir, I'll be plain. I don't know what's gone on in this house, but I have looked at a great many sick people, and this is not one, and I will say so to any man that asks me under oath if it comes to it." The silence after that had a floor to it. You could feel it drop. Coffee, the solicitor, cleared his throat and spoke for the first time. "Judge Whitmore, Mr. Harrow's engaged me to look into a matter of contract payment rendered for work and the question of whose work it rightly was. I'd like your leave to examine the ledgers. You can refuse, of course." A dry pause. "You'll understand that a refusal from a former magistrate tends to be read a particular way. Read how you like," said Elias Whitmore. You've no order and no standing in this county." "No, sir," Coffee agreed mildly. "Not yet." And Abigail, watching her father, saw the thing tip. Saw him understand that not yet was the whole game, that a man like Harrow with a man like Coffee did not need to win today. They only needed to not lose, and to come back and come back, careful and slow and legal, until the not yet became a now. She saw her father understand it, and she saw him make his choice, and it was not the choice her mother wanted. "Take the ledger," Elias said. The whole room turned to him. "Elias," Margaret from behind him, low and dangerous. "Take it." He would not look at his wife. "Take it and read it and be quick. I'll not have it said the judge barred the door. Whatever I've done, Coffee, I'll not add obstruction to it in front of a county clerk. Read the book." It was. Abigail thought the closest her father had ever come to courage, and the reason for it broke her heart, even as it freed her, because he wasn't protecting her, and he wasn't repenting. He was protecting the one thing he had left. Not his money, not his daughter. The story the county told about him. Even now, even cornered Elias Whitmore was managing his reputation. He would rather be the judge who opened his own books than the judge who hid them. It was the only kind of honesty he had. It would have to be enough for now. Coffee read the ledger at the study table for 2 hours, while the clerk Otis went back to town for the filed plans, and Abigail sat in the drawing room. The drawing room downstairs, in a chair in daylight for the first time in 8 years, with Clara beside her, holding her hand so tight it hurt, and waited. Harrow sat across from them. He'd taken his hat off and set it on his knee, and for a while he said nothing, and then he said plain, "I owe you more than an apology. Miss Whitmore and I mean to see it paid, but I'll say the apology anyway. 2 years I paid Pemberton, and never once asked to meet the man's draftsman. Never occurred to me a firm could hide who did the work. That was careless of me, and my carelessness helped keep this door shut. I won't forget that. You couldn't have known. I could have asked." He turned the hat on his knee. "My father built the first 10 miles of our line with his own hands before he owned a foot of it. He used to say a man that don't know who's doing his work don't own his work. He's just renting the story of it. I let myself rent the story. I'm done renting it." Abigail looked at him. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. "Truly, you've got your warehouse. It stands. It'll carry your grain whoever's name is on the plan. You could ride home and I'd never trouble you. Why sit in a hostile house and read another man's ledger over $11,000 you can afford to lose?" Nathaniel was quiet a moment. "Because it's not the money," he said. "You had that right last night. It was never the money." He looked at his hands. "I had a sister, younger. She was quicker than me at every single thing. Ma'am figures letters, all of it. And there wasn't one door in this country open to her that was open to me. And I watched her spend herself dry on a life too small for her, and I never once lifted a hand to make it different, because I was young and it was the way of things, and I didn't see it." He looked up. "She's gone now, and I'll tell you the plain truth, Miss Whitmore, because you told me yours when you hung that drawing out that window. It wasn't a warehouse I saw. It was the true line down the margin in a hand I'd have known anywhere by then, and the name that ought to be on it wasn't. And I thought, I am not going to walk down another set of stairs and out another door, and let it be the way of things one more time." He stopped. "So there's your why. It ain't charity. It's an old debt I can't pay to the one it's owed to, so I'm paying it to you. I hope you'll let me." Clara, beside her sister, had begun quietly to cry. Abigail did not cry. She had cried enough. She looked at this plain, careful, unlovely, handsome man, turning his hat on his knee, and she felt the thing she'd folded away years ago, with her don't, and her wanting, and her hope come loose entirely. And she was too honest with herself to call it anything but what it was, and too frightened of it to name it out loud. So she said instead, "Then pay it right, Mr. Harrow. Not with pity. I've had a bellyful of being pitied, and I'd sooner go back behind the door than be your good deed. No, ma'am. I mean it. Don't you rescue me. I broke that window myself. I lowered that drawing myself. I have designed 40 buildings from a locked room with a single lamp, and not one of them has fallen down. I don't want a rescuer." Her chin came up. "I want a contract, full credit, full payment for 8 years into my own hand and no other. And my name, my own name on every plan I ever drew and every plan I draw after. You can give me that." Nathaniel Harrow looked at her a long moment, and then slow. The corner of his mouth moved, and it was the first time she'd seen him anywhere near a smile, and it changed his whole plain face. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I reckon giving you exactly that is going to be the best day's work I ever do." And that was when Coffee came in from the study with the ledger under his arm, and a look on his gray face like a man who's found the body, and set the book down open on the table between them and said, "Mr. Harrow, Miss Whitmore, I think you'd both best see this." The ledger told it plainer than Abigail herself could have. Coffee walked them through it line by line, dry and precise. And it was worse even than she'd known, because she'd only ever seen the work, never the money. There it all was in her father's own careful hand, received of Harrow, on account of warehouse elevations. $4,000, and then a page on the same money bleeding out again, and where it bled to made Clara stand up so fast, her chair went over. "That's my settlement," Clara said. Her voice had gone strange. Coffee. Read that line again. Coffee read it. "To the account of C. Whitmore marriage settlement per agreement with S. Pemberton, $2,000. My marriage settlement." Clara was white now, white as her sister had been at the top of the stairs. "The money Father's putting up for me to marry Silas, that's Abby's money. That's the warehouse money. He stole her work and sold it to you, and he's using it to buy me a husband who—" She stopped. She turned to her sister with a look of pure horror dawning. "Silas signed your drawings. Silas took your name off your work and put his own on it and got paid, and that same man is the one they want me to marry. Abby. Abby, I was going to marry the man who's been stealing from you for 8 years. Yes," Abigail said quietly, "you were. I won't." Clara said it to the whole room, to the ledger, to the window, to God. "You hear me. I will not marry Silas Pemberton. I'll not take $1 of my sister's stolen work to buy myself a thief. I'd sooner not marry at all. I'd sooner be locked in that room myself than—" Her voice broke and she caught it and drove on. And in that moment, she stopped being anybody's little sister and became all at once a Whitmore in the full iron of it. "Where is he? Where's Silas? When does he come back?" "Thursday," said a voice from the doorway. They all turned. Margaret Whitmore stood there, and she had heard enough of it, and she was done pretending. She came into the room the way she'd come down the stairs at Harrow, like frost, like weather. And she looked at her 2 daughters, the ink-stained one and the horrified one, and at the railroad man and the solicitor and the open damning book, and when she spoke it was to Abigail alone, and it was the coldest thing anyone said in that house all day. "You always did want to burn it down," Margaret said. "Even as a child, you could not simply be what you were born to be. You had to be right and clever and difficult. And now you've had your window and your stranger and your little scene. And by nightfall, it will be all over the county and every one of us will pay for it. Clara's ruined. Your father's ruined. I am ruined. And you?" Her lip curled. "You'll have your name on a warehouse. I hope it keeps you warm." The room waited for Abigail to break. She had broken for that woman 100 times over. A word from her mother had ended more of Abigail's days than the key ever had. Margaret Whitmore had never once raised her voice or lifted a hand. She had never needed to. She had a way of making a person feel that their very existence was a debt they could not repay, and she had used it on Abigail for 27 years. Abigail stood up. She stood up out of the chair in the drawing room in daylight, with the ledger open beside her and her sister at her shoulder, and the true line of her whole life laid bare on the table, and she looked at her mother, and she did not break. "You're right," Abigail said. "It will be all over the county by nightfall. And do you know, Mother, for 8 years, that was the one thing I was most afraid of, that people would know. You taught me that. You taught me that being known was the worst thing that could happen to a woman like me. Better a locked door than a whisper. Better a grave in the churchyard than a name in a mouth." She took a breath. "But I've been thinking up there all night about what's actually so terrible about being known. And I can't find it anymore. Let them know. Let every soul in this county know that Judge Whitmore's dead daughter drew the warehouse and the bridge and the very room you take your callers in. Let them know I'm not sick and not mad and not ruined. Let them know exactly what was done and who did it. I am done being your family's secret mother. You can be ruined if you like. I'm not going back in the ground to keep you comfortable." For one long moment, Margaret Whitmore had no answer. And then, and Abigail would remember this. The rest of her life, her mother's cold, perfect face did a thing it had never done in front of her children. It cracked just at the mouth, just for an instant, into something that was not frost at all, something old and frightened and grieving, and Margaret turned quick so no one would see it and left the room without another word, and the sound of her going up the stairs alone was the loneliest sound in the house. Abigail sat back down. Her hands were shaking. Clara took one of them. "Thursday," Clara said again, low steady, now the horror in her hardened into something with a use. "He comes back Thursday, Abby, and he'll walk in here smiling, and he'll call your work charming sketches the way he always has, and he won't know a single thing has changed." Abigail looked at the ledger. She looked at the true line of it. She looked at Harrow, who had said the best day's work I ever do, and at Coffee with his careful gray patience, and at her sister's fierce new steadiness, and at the summer light coming plain and gold through a window with nothing between her and it. "No," Abigail said. "He won't know a single thing has changed." She closed the ledger. "Let's not tell him." They had 4 days, and Abigail meant to use every hour of them. The first thing she did that morning was refuse to go back upstairs. "I'll take a room on the ground floor," she told Coffee, "or I'll sleep in the drawing room in that chair, but I'll not set foot in the East Wing again except to carry my own drawings out of it. And I want witnesses when I do. I want Dr. Bell there, and you, Mr. Coffee, and I want it written down what's in that room, because in 8 years my father has taken a great many things out of it, and I mean to see he can't say later that they were never there." "That's prudent," Coffee said, and made a note. "It's not prudent," Abigail said. "It's 8 years of learning how a liar works." She turned to Nathaniel. "You said you'd send the clerk for the plan Silas filed with the county, in his hand. Has he gone?" "Otis left an hour ago." "Good, because there's a thing about those plans nobody's thought of yet, and it's the whole case." She was moving now, quick, the words coming faster than she could tidy them, 8 years of thinking, with no one to think it pouring out all at once. "Silas can't draw Mr. Harrow. He can trace. He can copy a fair line off a page I've already made. But he cannot originate, and there's a way to prove it that no court can argue with." She stopped. "You've got my drawings, the ones in this house, and Otis is fetching the ones Silas filed. Lay them side by side, and you'll find the filed copies are missing every correction." Nathaniel frowned. "Every correction. Every place I changed my mind mid-draft. A real drawing. Mr. Harrow, a drawing made by the hand that's thinking is full of ghosts. A line drawn, then rubbed out, then drawn again, a half-inch over. The loft I told you about last night, the one I redid in a night when I found the knot in the beam. My original has the first design still under it faint where I erased it. Silas's filed copy won't. It can't." He copied the answer. He never worked the problem. And any builder, any surveyor, any man who's ever held a pencil will look at those 2 pages and know in 1 second which hand solved it and which hand only copied down the solution. She was breathing hard. "That's not my word against his. That's the paper itself telling the truth. You can't cross-examine a ghost line." Coffee had stopped writing. He was looking at her with something new in his gray face. "Miss Whitmore," he said slowly, "I have practiced law 31 years, and that is a cleaner point of evidence than I have heard from most men I've paid to make them. I've had 8 years, and no company, but the problem," Abigail said. "You get good at a thing alone in a room with nothing else to be good at. And Nathaniel Harrow, watching her, thought that he had never in his life wanted so badly to give a person the one thing they'd been robbed of, and knew, with the plain practical certainty he brought to everything, that the one thing was not rescue and not money, and not even his own heart, which he was privately aware was already lost. The one thing was a fair fight. She had never once had one. He meant to give her one. "Then we won't lay them side by side," he said. Abigail looked at him. "We'll do better than that," Nathaniel went on. "We lay them side by side in front of witnesses that count. Not you and me and coffee in a drawing room. Anybody can say we cooked it up. We do it in front of men Silas himself would trust, men whose word the county takes." He turned to Coffee. "Who examines a contested plan in this state? Is there such a thing? A board of surveyors, man, an examiner." "There's the county surveyor," Coffee said. "And above him a commissioner of works who sits at the assizes. And there's, he tapped the table. "There is one other, Mrs. Wexley." Clara made a small startled sound. "The hostess?" Abigail said. "The widow," Coffee corrected. "Colonel Wexley left her the whole of the estate, and more to the point, his seat on the County Improvement Board, the only woman ever to hold it, and she holds it, because not one man on that board can add a column of figures faster than she can, and they all know it, and they're all afraid of her, which suits her fine." A dry flicker crossed his face. "If Eleanor Wexley looks at two plans and says which hand made them, there is not a magistrate in Virginia who'll argue. And she takes callers Wednesday afternoons." Abigail sat very still. "Tomorrow's Wednesday," she said. "It is. And Silas comes Thursday." "He does." She looked at the ledger closed on the table, and then at Clara, and then at Nathaniel, and the plan assembled itself in her head, the way a truss assembled itself, every piece taking load from every other. "Then here's how it goes," Abigail said. "Tomorrow I take my drawings and Silas's filed copies to Mrs. Wexley, and I let her, not me, her say aloud, which hand made them. If she says it's mine, I have the one witness in this county. No one can call a liar, or a lovesick railroad man, or a hysterical woman. And then Thursday, Silas walks into this house not knowing that the county's most respected woman has already looked at his lie and named it." She stood. "He'll come in smiling, thinking he holds the whole hand. And he won't know the table's already been turned over." "Abby." Clara's voice was uncertain. "Mrs. Wexley's never so much as spoken to me at church. Why would she help us?" "She won't be helping us," Abigail said. "That's the beauty of it. She'll be doing exactly what she loves best, being right in a room full of people who wish she weren't. We don't ask her a favor, Clara. We hand her a puzzle and a scoundrel and let her nature do the rest." Coffee almost smiled. "I'll write and request an audience," he said, reaching for his case. "In Mr. Harrow's name, she'll not refuse a man building a canal through the county." "No," Abigail said. "In mine." Coffee looked up. "Write it in my name," she said. "Abigail Whitmore. Not Mr. Harrow's. If I'm going to stop being a secret Mr. Coffee, I'll not start by hiding behind a man's letter to do it. She'll come for the puzzle, but let it be my name at the bottom that brings her." There was a silence. "Yes," Coffee said. "All right. Your name." And so it began, but it did not go smoothly because Elias Whitmore was not finished, and a cornered magistrate is at his most dangerous exactly when everyone has decided he's beaten. He waited until the men had gone Coffee to town to send his letter. Nathaniel to the inn to wire New York about the delay, Otis still fetching the plans, and then he came into the drawing room where his two daughters sat, and he had put back on the one face Abigail feared more than the fourth. Not the frightened face, the reasonable one. "Abigail," he said, and sat uninvited across from her. "I'd like to speak with you as your father. Only a few minutes. Clara, leave us." "No," said Clara. He hadn't expected that from Clara. Abigail saw it land. "Clara, this is between—" "There is nothing between you and Abby that isn't also between you and me," Clara said. "You knelt me at a stone with her name on it, Father. You let me mourn a living woman for 8 years. You do not get to send me out of the room anymore." Her voice shook, but she did not move. "I'll stay." Elias looked from one daughter to the other, and Abigail watched him revise, watched him decide he could work with an audience of two. "Very well." He folded his hands. "I want to say that I know how this looks. I want to say that if you'd come to me, if any of this had been discussed between us as a family, a great deal of grief might have been spared. But I'll not defend myself. I'll do a harder thing. I'll ask what you want, Abigail, and I'll try to give it to you so that we needn't drag this family through the county's mouth." He leaned forward and his voice went gentle, and it was the gentleness that had ended 100 of her days. "You want your name on the plans. Done. I'll write to the county myself and set the record straight quietly, properly. No scandal, no ruin. You want the money. It's yours. I'll deed it over. You want to work in daylight. Work in daylight here in this house with my blessing, and no locked doors ever again. You can have every single thing you've asked for, Abigail. Today. Without one word of this reaching Mrs. Wexley, or a courtroom, or a soul outside these walls." He spread his hands. "All I ask is that we keep it in the family. That's all. Everything you want and quiet. Isn't that better than war?" And it was God help her tempting. Abigail felt it tempt her, and hated that it did, and understood in the same breath exactly what it was, because she had spent 8 years learning the man across from her, the way a prisoner learns his jailer's footsteps. "That's a good offer," she said slowly. "It's an honest one." "No," Abigail said. "It's a clever one, which is a different thing, and you've always been clever. Father, I'll grant you that I got it from you, along with the thing you locked me up for having." She leaned forward to match him. "Tell me, in this quiet, in the family version, where I have everything and no one outside the walls ever knows who tells the county I was never sick." He blinked. "I don't see that anyone need. That's my point. No one need. The stone stays in the churchyard. The whisper stays that poor Abigail died of a fever. And in 5 years or 10, when it suits you or mother or whoever holds the family name by then, the room's still there. The door still locks. And there's a new clever girl in the family, a niece, a granddaughter, and the machinery to disappear, her is all still in place, oiled, ready, legal, and no one outside these walls ever knew it was used before, because I took the quiet deal and let the secret stay a secret." Her voice rose. "You're not offering me my name, Father. You're offering to give me my things back if I'll agree to keep the system that took them. And I won't. That's exactly the trade I won't make. Better a scandal that ends it than a quiet that keeps the door hinged and waiting." Elias Whitmore's reasonable face slipped. "You would ruin your own mother," he said, "your own sister's prospects. My name that fed and clothed you for 20 years, rather than accept a father's fare, Clara's prospects." Abigail laughed short and hard. "You mean Silas?" "Silas Pemberton is a respectable, Silas Pemberton is a forger who's been signing my work for 2 years, and you know it because you handed him the pen." Abigail stood. "You want to talk about who's ruining Clara's prospects? You sold her to the man who's been robbing me with the money you got by robbing me, and you were going to smile at the wedding. Don't you dare sit in that chair and call yourself the one protecting this family. You are the flood father. You've been the flood the whole time. I just finally built the wall." The reasonable face was gone entirely now. What was under it was the thing she'd frightened out of him at the window, cornered and old and mean. "You'll regret this," Elias said, very low, rising. "Wexley or no Wexley, you think that man Harrow will stand by you when the county turns? He's got a canal to finish and shareholders in New York, and the first time your name is a liability instead of a curiosity, he'll cut you loose and finish his warehouse with any draftsman that'll take the fee. You're a novelty to him, girl, a conscience he's soothing. Novelty wears off, and when it does, you'll have burned every bridge back to this family for a man who'll have forgotten your name by Christmas." It was the cruelest thing he could have said, because it was the one thing she was afraid of, and he had always known exactly where her fear lived. Abigail felt it go in. And then she felt Clara's hand find hers, and Clara, who had been 11, who had mourned at a stone, who had believed for 8 years that her sister was a monster, stood up beside her and said to their father in a voice gone perfectly steady, "Then he'll forget her name, and I won't, and it'll still be worth it, because at least she'll have had it." At least once before she died, someone will have written Abigail Whitmore under something true. You can't even give her that much, father. All you can offer is to give it back on the condition she agree it was fair to take. So don't you talk to us about bridges. You're the only thing anyone in this room has ever needed to burn. Elias Whitmore looked at his two daughters standing hand in hand against him, and something went out of his face, not softening, nothing so warm as that, but a kind of collapse. The look of a man discovering that the thing he'd controlled for 20 years had quietly, permanently stopped being controllable. He left without another word, but Abigail did not feel like she'd won. She stood there holding her sister's hand with her father's poison working in her, and when the door shut, she said low, so only Clara could hear, "What if he's right?" He's not. He might be, Clara, about Harrow. Men like that, I have watched them from a shutter for 8 years come to this house full of purpose and ride away easy. Why should this one be different? Because he took his hat off. Because he had a sister once. Her voice cracked. I can't afford to be wrong about him. I've got nothing left to spend on being wrong. If I burn it all down on the strength of a man I've known one day, and he tires of me the way father says, Abby. Clara turned her by the shoulders. Look at me. You don't have to know if he'll stay. That's not the question. The question is whether the thing is worth doing, whether he stays or not. Is your name worth having even if he's gone by Christmas? Abigail was quiet a long moment. Yes, she said. Yes, it's worth having if I lose everything else in the world. Then it doesn't matter what he does, Clara said. You're not doing it for him. You never were. You'd have broken that window if the man underneath had been a stranger you'd never see again. You told me so yourself last night. So stop letting father put a man's name on your courage. It was yours before Harrow ever climbed those stairs, and it'll be yours after whatever he does. And that more than anything the railroad man had said was the thing that steadied her, because it came from the one person in the house who had nothing to gain by it, who was in truth about to lose the most, her marriage, her settlement, her standing, and was choosing her sister over all of it, with both eyes open. When did you get so wise? Abigail said thickly. 8 years kneeling at a rock, Clara said. Gives a person time to think. And then she almost smiled, and it broke the worst of it, and the two of them stood in the drawing room and got their breath back and did not let go of each other's hands. Otis came back near noon with the filed plans, and what he brought changed everything a second time. He laid them on the table, still road-dusty, and Abigail was on them before he'd got his hat off unrolling. Waiting the corners, bending close, and Nathaniel arrived back from the inn, watched her face go through 3 things, in quick order. Recognition. Then confusion. Then a cold, dawning fury that he had not yet seen on her, and hoped never to have aimed at himself. These aren't mine, she said. The room went quiet. She pulled one plan closer, then another, her ink-stained finger flying across the sheets. The warehouse, yes, that's traced off mine. That's Silas's copy. I know my own loft, but these. She stabbed at a 3rd and 4th sheet. A bridge, a mill weir, a row of tenant cottages on the Ashford Road. These are filed under Silas Pemberton, dated, stamped, paid, and I never drew them. I've never seen them. Someone drew these, Mr. Harrow, and it wasn't me, and it sure as sin wasn't Silas. Because look, she jabbed at the line work. Same failing, same tell, no corrections, all copied. The man traced these same as he traced mine, which means... She stopped. Nathaniel finished it for her quietly. Which means there's another one. Another draftsman he's been robbing. Abigail sat down hard. Another locked door somewhere. Another... Her voice failed. She looked up at Nathaniel with the fury gone all to grief. It's not just me. He's got a whole practice built on stolen hands, and my father knew, and the county paid, and somewhere out there is some other poor soul drawing weirs by lamplight and getting Silas Pemberton's name for it, and until an hour ago I thought I was the only prisoner in this story. The room absorbed it. Even Coffee looked shaken. Can you tell whose hand? Nathaniel asked. The way you told me yours." Abigail bent back over the sheets, and the draftsman in her overrode the grief, because the draftsman always won when there was a problem to be read. She was quiet a long time, tracing, comparing, her lips moving. "A man," she said finally. "Older than me, see the letter forms. That's an old drawing school hand, they don't teach it anymore. Trained. Properly trained, better schooled than I ever was. I'm self-taught off my father's books, and this fellow had a master. And," she frowned, "sick. Or old. Or hurt. The later sheets, the line work's gone shaky where the early ones are clean. Whoever this is, Mr. Harrow, they're failing. Their hands failing. And Silas is working them right up to the end." Nathaniel Harrow's plain face had gone very still and very dangerous. "Coffee," he said. "When Silas comes Thursday, I want to know every commission he's filed in this county for 5 years, and I want to know who they were really drawn for, and I want to know it before he sits down." He picked up his hat. "Miss Whitmore, tomorrow you go to Mrs. Wexley as we planned. But we're not going to prove one theft anymore. We're going to prove a machine. And I'd like her to look at these," he touched the strange plans, "and tell us if she recognizes the hand, because a draftsman, that good trained under a master in a county this size, somebody knows who he is." Abigail looked at the shaky lines of a failing stranger's work, and something in her set like a keystone. "He's not a suspect to me," she said quietly. "He's the only other person alive who knows what that room does to you. Whoever he is, Mr. Harrow, we don't just prove his hand to win a case. We open his door too. That's the price of mine. I'll not walk free out of one locked room and leave a man in another so I could use his plans for evidence. If I'm going to be free, then he is. That's the deal I make with myself, and I'll not unmake it whatever it costs the schedule." Nathaniel looked at her a long moment, hat in hand. "No, ma'am," he said. "We'll open his door too." And Abigail believed him, not because her father was wrong about railroad men in general, but because she was learning that this particular one meant a thing when he said it. And that was a discovery almost as frightening as the locked plans, because it meant she was going to have to decide sooner than she wanted what to do with a man who kept his word. Wednesday came, and with it Mrs. Wexley, and it did not go at all the way Abigail had rehearsed. She had dressed with Clara's help in the best of the few things they'd carried down from the East Wing, and she had practiced what she'd say, and she had steadied herself for a grand cold widow who would have to be won. What arrived instead? A full hour before the appointed time, unannounced, letting herself in past a flustered housekeeper, was a small, quick, sharp-eyed woman of 60 who came straight into the drawing room where the plans were laid out, ignored every person in it, went directly to the table, and bent over the sheets without so much as removing her gloves. "Mrs. Wexley." Coffee began. "May I present?" "Hush." She didn't look up. "Who traced these?" Nobody had told her anything yet. Abigail's breath caught. "You can see it's tracing," Abigail said. "Of course it's tracing, girl. A child could see it's tracing. There's not a ghost line on the whole sorry stack." Mrs. Wexley flicked through them fast, contemptuous. "No corrections, no working, no thinking a man could file these as evidence of forgery and save himself a lawyer. The question isn't whether these are copies. The question is what they're copied from, and that—" She straightened and turned and fixed her sharp eyes on Abigail for the first time, and they went to the ink worked deep in the side of her hand before they ever went to her face. "Is a much more interesting question. You've a draftsman's hand, and you've been shut out of the sun a long while by the look of you, and you asked me here in your own name, and not that railroad man's, which took nerve. So, you're the original." It was not a question, and Abigail did not treat it as one. "I'm the original of the warehouse and the bridge and the estate work," she said. "Not of those." She indicated the strange plans. "The weir, the cottages, the mill, those are someone else's stolen hand. I hoped you might know whose." Mrs. Wexley went back to the table. She looked at the strange plans a long time, and the room did not dare breathe, and Abigail watched the old woman's face change from contempt to attention to something that was almost but not quite grief. "Well," Mrs. Wexley said at last, very quietly, and all the sharpness had gone out of her voice, I'll be damned. You know the hand, Nathaniel said. I know the hand. I have known it 50 years. She did not look up. This is Josiah Bell's work. Old drawing master taught half the surveyors in 3 counties taught me my angles when I was a slip of a girl, and my father thought geometry would ruin my complexion. Her jaw worked. Josiah's near 80 now and gone blind in one eye, and poor as a church mouse since his pension failed and he lives. Everyone knows he lives in 2 rooms over the Sadlers in town with a nephew who manages his affairs. She turned. A nephew. By marriage. Do you know what that nephew's name is? Abigail already knew. The whole room knew. But Mrs. Wexley said it anyway and made them hear it. Silas Pemberton, she said. The blind old master's devoted nephew who carries his uncle's little drawings down to the county office and files them under his own name and collects the fees and gives the old man his board and calls it charity. She set the plan down as though it had dirtied her glove. I have sat on that board 6 years and stamped Silas Pemberton's plans and thought the boy had come on wonderfully since his apprentice days. And all the while it was Josiah drawing blind by a window for his keep while his own kin took the credit and the coin. She was quiet a moment. You wanted to know if I'd help you, girl. You needn't have worried. I'd help you if I hated you. That man has made a fool of me in my own boardroom for 6 years, and I do not forgive being made a fool. Abigail felt the plan shift under her feet again the 4th time. In 3 days the whole ground had moved, but this time it moved toward her and she found her voice. Then help me write, she said. Not just to catch him, to free the old man. Whatever you say tomorrow, whatever you prove, it has to end with Josiah Bell and the son, and paid and named same as me. I'll not use his stolen work to win my freedom and leave him in his 2 rooms over the Sadlers. He gets his door open too, or I don't want the victory. Mrs. Wexley looked at her for a long appraising moment. You're an unusual young woman, she said. I've had an unusual 8 years, so I gather. The old widow's mouth twitched. Very well. Here is what I'll do, and here is what I'll not. I'll not go to your Mrs. Wexley's parlor games and drop hints over tea. I'm too old and too rich to be subtle, and I never had the knack. What I'll do is this. Tomorrow when this Silas comes, Coffee tells me he comes tomorrow, I'll come too, uninvited. And I'll bring old Josiah with me in my own carriage out of his 2 rooms and into the daylight, and I'll set him in a chair in this drawing room, and we'll see how devoted the nephew is to his blind uncle when the blind uncle is sitting right there, while the nephew calls a woman's true drawings charming sketches. Her eyes glinted hard as glass. There's nothing a forger fears like the man he forged sitting across the room. Let him lie to both of them at once. Let's see how well he does it. There was a silence in the drawing room. And then Nathaniel Harrow, who had said very little through all of it, set down his hat and said, Ma'am, I've closed a good many deals in my life, and I don't believe I've ever heard a better one laid out faster. But there's a piece missing, and I'd rather say it now than have it sprung on us tomorrow. Say it then. The judge. Nathaniel looked toward the door Elias had left by. Silas didn't build this machine alone. Every one of these plans went through the county office, and for 30 years the man whose word ran that office was Elias Whitmore. He knew. He had to have known. He filed his own daughter's work under Pemberton's name and took the fee. Which means tomorrow, when we open this up, we're not just ending a forger. We're ruining a magistrate, Miss Whitmore's own father, in his own drawing room in front of his wife, his daughter's the county's most respected widow, and a blind old man he helped to rob. He turned to Abigail and his voice gentled. I'll not do that to you by ambush, ma'am. So I'll ask you plain in front of witnesses, and however you answer is how it goes. Do you want your father in the room tomorrow when it falls? Or do you want him spared it? The question landed in Abigail like a stone in a well. Everyone was looking at her. Clara had gone still. Coffee had set down his pen. Even Mrs. Wexley waited, and Abigail found to her own surprise that she did not have a ready answer, because for 8 years she had imagined this moment 10,000 times, and in every single version her father was there, and in every single version she'd wanted him to watch. But now that it was real, now that she could actually have it, she discovered the wanting had gone strange and heavy in her hands. I used to dream about it. she said slowly. Him in the room, watching it come apart, everyone knowing what he was. For 8 years, that dream was the only warm thing I had. She looked at her own ink-stained hand. But sitting here with it real, I don't want it anymore. Not because I forgive him, I don't. I may never. But because I've watched these 3 days what wanting to hurt him does to me, and I don't like the shape it makes me into. Clara said it last night she'd sooner not marry at all than take stolen money to buy a thief. And I've been thinking there's a version of tomorrow where I win everything, and I'm still underneath the person my father made someone whose triumph is another person's humiliation. And I don't want to be that. I got enough of that from him. She looked up. So no. Don't put him in the room to break him. But don't spare him either that's not mine to give. And it'd be its own kind of lie. Do it this way. Let the truth come out tomorrow in front of who it needs to come out in front of Silas Josiah. Mrs. Wexley, the record. And let my father choose whether he's in the room when it does. Send him word tonight, plain, no threat and no plea tomorrow. The whole of it comes to light here at noon. He may attend, or he may be absent, but he cannot stop it. And then it's his choice whether to face it or flee it. That's the one mercy I'll give him, not a spared reputation, but a chance to meet the truth on his own feet, instead of having it dragged to his chair. Her voice was steady now, and something in it had changed, had grown up past the girl at the window into something Mrs. Wexley plainly recognized and approved of. He locked me in a room for 8 years, and never once let me choose to face anything. I'll not become him tomorrow by doing the same to him. He gets the choice. Whatever he does with it is on his own soul. The room was quiet a moment. That, said Mrs. Wexley, is a great deal wiser than I was at your age. Or frankly, mine. She gathered her gloves. Very well. Coffee sends word to the judge tonight. I bring Josiah at noon tomorrow. Mr. Harrow has his ledgers and his clerk. And you, girl, she looked at Abigail. You bring your originals and your ghost lines and your nerve, and you let the paper do the talking, and you don't say one word more than you have to, because the strongest thing in that room tomorrow won't be anything anyone says. It'll be your face, alive, sitting in the sun. Everything the lie was built to hide, just quietly there, where all of them have to look at it. She pulled on her gloves with 2 sharp tugs. Nothing breaks a lie like the truth sitting in a chair refusing to be embarrassed. I learned that at 50. You've learned it at 27. God help the men of this county when you've had another 20 years. She left in a rustle of purpose, and the room let out its breath. But there was one more turn to come that day, and it came at dusk from the person Abigail least expected. Her mother. Margaret Whitmore came to the ground floor room they'd made up for. Abigail came alone after dark, without her usual armor of cold, and stood in the doorway a long moment before she spoke, and Abigail braced for the frost. It didn't come. I've come to tell you something, Margaret said, and then I'll go, and you needn't answer, and I'll not blame you if you can't bear to look at me while I say it. Her voice was not cold. It was worse than cold. It was tired and old, and stripped of every performance Abigail had ever seen her give. You think I made you a secret out of pride, to protect the family name. That's what your father tells himself, and I let him because it's the story that lets us both sleep. She stopped. It isn't true. Or it isn't the whole truth. I made you a secret because I was afraid of you, Abigail. Not of the scandal, of you, of what you were, because I was a clever girl once too. Abigail sat very still. I was quicker than every man my father knew. Margaret went on, and there was no self-pity in it, only a flat, exhausted honesty that was somehow harder to hear than any cruelty. I did his accounts from the age of 10. I don't know what I could have done, there was no door for it. There never is. And I learned the way girls like us learn that being clever was a thing to be managed before it ruined you. I managed it. I put it away. I married well and ran a good house and taught myself to want nothing more. And it worked, Abigail. It worked for 30 years, right up until I had a daughter who wouldn't put it away, who wouldn't be managed. who said no in front of company, and drew bridges by lamplight, and shamed me not by failing, but by refusing to do the one thing I'd broken myself to do. Her voice cracked just once. I couldn't bear to watch you be brave, because if you could be brave, then I never had to be a coward, and I couldn't live with that, so I helped him lock the door. Not for the family, for me, because a free daughter was a mirror I couldn't stand to look in. The silence after that was total. I'm not asking to be forgiven, Margaret said. I know what I did. I knelt your sister at a stone. I'll carry that to my grave, and I should. I only came to say tomorrow when it comes out and I'm ruined and everyone knows what this family did. I want you to know I won't fight it. Whatever Elias does, whatever Silas does, I'll not stand up and call you mad to save myself. I did that to you for 8 years. I'll not do it in a courtroom. She turned to go. That's all. That's the only thing I have left that's worth giving you, and it isn't much, and it's late by more years than I can count. Good night, Abigail. She was at the door when Abigail spoke. Mother? Margaret stopped. Abigail did not say she forgave her. She wasn't sure she did. She wasn't sure she ever would. And she had learned these 3 days not to give people the words they hadn't earned just to make a room more comfortable. But she looked at her mother, this ruined, honest, exhausted woman who had chosen the same door for herself before she ever chose it for her daughter, and she found there was one true thing she could give that wasn't a lie. You could still be brave, Abigail said. It's late, but it's not too late until you're in the ground, Mother. I know. I spent 8 years in a grave with my name on it, and I climbed out. Tomorrow when it comes out, don't just not fight it. Stand up, say what you did. Say it out loud in front of Mrs. Wexley and God and everyone. Not to save me, I don't need saving anymore. To save the next clever girl in this family, and there'll be one, there's always one. Be the woman who broke the door instead of the one who helped hinge it. You said you couldn't bear to watch me be brave. Her voice was quiet and steady. Then stop watching. Do it yourself. Margaret Whitmore stood in the doorway with her back to her daughter, and her shoulders shook once hard, and she did not turn around and she did not answer. And after a long moment, she went out into the dark hall. But she did not go up to the east wing where her rooms were. Abigail heard her footsteps go the other way, down toward the study, toward the room where Elias sat with his lamp and his ledger and his poison. And she heard faintly, through 2 walls, her mother's voice begin to speak low and steady, and going on, and her father's voice cut in sharp, and her mother's voice go on anyway. Unbroken, refusing to stop, and Abigail sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, and listened to a woman she had feared her whole life, finally 30 years too late, stand her ground, and did not know whether to weep for the waste of it, or take heart from the fact that it was possible at all even now, even so late. Clara found her there an hour later, still sitting up. They've been at it since dark, Clara whispered, sliding in beside her. Mother and father, I've never heard her raise her voice to him, not once in my whole life. What did you say to her? I told her it wasn't too late to be brave. Clara was quiet. Was that true? I don't know, Abigail said honestly. I hope so. I said it as much for me as for her. She leaned her head against her sister's. I keep thinking about tomorrow, Clara. About Silas walking in that door smiling. And I ought to feel ready. I've got the plans and the ghost lines and Mrs. Wexley and a blind old master coming in a carriage to shame his own thieving nephew. It's a better hand than I ever dreamed I'd hold. And I am ready. She swallowed. But I keep waiting to feel like I've won something, and I don't. I feel like I'm about to lose a family I already lost 8 years ago all over again in one afternoon in front of witnesses. Is that strange? To grieve a thing you never really had? No, Clara said. I don't think it's strange at all. I think it's the whole of what tomorrow is. Not a victory. A funeral. The real one finally for the family we were supposed to be. She took her sister's hand. But Abby, you don't have to grieve it alone this time. That's the difference. Last time they made me grieve you at a stone by myself. Tomorrow, whatever falls, whoever's ruined, whoever runs you. And I sit in that room side by side, and we watch it together. And then we get up together, and we walk out that front door into the sun together, and we go build something that isn't this. That's the part they can't take, not the family. The family's already gone, but the getting up together, that's ours. Abigail turned and looked at her sister in the dark. This girl who had knelt at a stone with her name on it and mourned her for 8 years and had, in the space of 3 days, become the truest ally she had ever had. "When did you decide?" Abigail asked. "To be on my side. Really decide. Not the first shock of it at the top of the stairs, the real deciding that you'd give up Silas and the settlement and your standing and all of it." "When—" Clara thought about it. "When Father offered you the quiet deal," she said. "This morning. When he sat there and offered you everything you wanted on the condition you agree it was fair to take it. And I watched you turn it down, not because you couldn't use the things God knows you've earned them, but because taking them quiet would have kept the door hinged for the next girl." She squeezed Abigail's hand. "That's when I knew. Because I realized I was the next girl, Abby. Not for the drawing, I can't draw a straight line. But there was going to be some way someday that this family decided I was inconvenient, and there'd have been a door for me too. Some quieter, prettier door, a bad marriage, or a long illness, or a room in the country for my nerves. And you turned down everything you wanted to keep that door from ever being used again. On me. On a girl you hadn't spoken to in 8 years, who'd been kneeling at your grave." Her voice thickened. "Nobody ever did anything like that for me in my life. So that's when I decided. That's the exact minute. When you paid your own freedom to keep a door from ever closing on me." The two sisters sat together in the dark room on the ground floor, while through 2 walls their mother's voice went on and on into the night, steady and unbroken. Saying at last the things she should have said 8 years before, and their father's answers came slower and slower and finally stopped, and the house that had kept its terrible quiet for 8 years filled instead for one long night with the sound of a woman refusing to be silent. And somewhere out past the dark fields, in 2 rented rooms above a saddler's shop in town, an old blind draftsman named Josiah Bell was told by a nephew he trusted that he'd be paid handsome for one more set of drawings, just as soon as a certain matter at Whitmore House was settled. Never knowing that at noon, the next day, a sharp old woman he'd taught his angles to 50 years past would arrive at his door in a fine carriage and take him by his failing hand and lead him out into a daylight he'd near forgotten, toward a drawing room where the woman who'd sworn to open his door was already waiting. Plans waited flat on the table, ghost lines and all ready at last to let the paper tell the truth. Silas Pemberton came at 11:30, a full half-hour early, and that was the first sign that something had already gone wrong for him, because Abigail had said he'd come early to control the scandal, and here he was doing it, only he did not yet know there was nothing left to control. He came in smiling. He always came in smiling. Abigail had seen that smile from her shutter a dozen times over 2 years, watching him ride up to collect drawings he hadn't made, and she'd hated it from a distance, without ever once being close enough to hate it properly. Now she sat in the drawing room in daylight in a chair with her originals weighted flat on the table beside her, and she watched Silas Pemberton walk into the room and hand his hat to the housekeeper and turn, still smiling, and see her. The smile didn't break. She'd give him that. He was better at it than her father. "Well," Silas said. "Miss Abigail, they told me you were poorly." "Did they?" "Grievously. For years." He came further and easy, unhurried, a handsome man who had never once in his life walked into a room that wasn't glad to see him and did not know how to imagine one now. "And here you are looking the picture of health. I'm glad of it, truly. Whatever quarrel your family's had over you, it's no business of mine, and I'm only pleased to see you well." He glanced at the table at the plans, and his eye passed over them without a flicker, and Abigail understood he'd already decided what they were. "Is the judge about—" "He asked me to bring the canal accounts." "He'll be down directly," Abigail said. "Sit, Mr. Pemberton. We're expecting others." "Others. A small party." She let it lie there flat and watched him decide it was nothing. "Won't you sit?" He sat. And Abigail, who had rehearsed this 100 times in the dark, who had planned the 7 questions and the metal and the whole slow closing of the trap, found that the man in front of her was so comfortable, so entirely unbothered, so certain the room was still his, that a cold fury rose in her, that she had to work to keep off her face. He didn't fear her. He'd stolen 8 years of her work and married her sister's settlement out of her stolen money. And he sat there asking after the judge, and he was not afraid, because it had never once occurred to him that a woman he'd robbed could be a danger to him. That was the thing she thought. That was the whole thing they'd all built their lives on. Her father, her mother, Silas, the county. That a clever woman was a resource, not a risk. You could take from her the way you took water from a well, and the well didn't come for you. She was going to teach him that a well could come for you. "Mr. Pemberton," she said pleasantly, "while we wait, might I ask you something professional? I've a little interest in drawing a young lady's pastime, my father calls it. And there's a thing about the canal warehouse I've never understood, and you're the very man to explain it." Silas smiled indulgently. "Of course. Though I warn you, Miss Abigail, the technical side of it can be dry-going for a lady. I'll bear up." She leaned forward. "The loft. It's carried on king posts, not queen. I've read that queen posts are stronger for a wide span. Why did you frame it the other way?" It was the same question Nathaniel had asked her at the window, and she asked it now for the same reason. And she watched Silas Pemberton's handsome face do exactly the thing she'd known it would do. Nothing. Then a small, smooth recovery. "Ah, well, these are judgments a builder makes on the ground you see. Structural matters. A great deal depends on the particular." He waved a hand. "Circumstances of the site." "The particular circumstances." Abigail nodded as if satisfied. "And which circumstance exactly made you choose king over queen?" "The span chiefly." "But a wider span wants queen posts. That's my confusion. A wide span is the very reason to choose queen." A flicker now. "The first one." "The timber then. The available timber." "The timber." She kept her voice gentle, curious, a lady seeking instruction. "That's interesting. What was wrong with the timber?" "Nothing wrong with it. It was—" He stopped. He was just beginning to feel the floor. "Miss Abigail, I don't know that a detailed discussion of joinery is quite the—" "There was a knot," Abigail said. The room went quiet. "In the third sample beam, the mill sent up." She went on, and her voice did not rise, and that was what made it terrible. The same flat gentleness he'd used on her father. A knot in the heart of it where you couldn't see it from the face. And whoever framed that loft found the knot and understood that a queen post truss puts its worst load right through the tie beam, and that a hidden knot in a tie beam under a loft full of green grain is how you kill 6 men in a rainstorm. So whoever framed that loft threw out the queen design and redrew the whole thing on king posts in a single night, because king posts carry the load down through the struts and spare the tie beam the worst of it. That's why it's king and not queen, Mr. Pemberton. She sat back. "It has nothing to do with the span. It has to do with a knot. And the man who framed that loft knew it in his hands. So I'll ask you plain. Since you signed the drawing and took the fee and stand here in my father's house as the architect of record, where was the knot?" Silas Pemberton opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You don't know," Abigail said, "because you weren't there when it was found. You weren't bent over the sample beam at 2 in the morning. You've never in your life found a knot in the heart of a beam, because you have never in your life designed anything, Mr. Pemberton. You copy. You trace a finished line off a finished page, and you sign it, and you file it, and you collect. And that would be a small, ugly crime if it stopped at money. But it doesn't stop at money, does it? Because the man who traces doesn't know where the knots are. And someday, you'll file a loft you didn't understand, and it'll be framed the pretty way instead of the true way, and it'll come down in a rainstorm with men underneath it. And that's the thing you've been risking every time you put your name on a hand you didn't have." The smile was entirely gone now. "Who told you about the knot?" Silas said very quietly, and it was the first true thing he'd said since he entered the room. "No one told me," Abigail said. "I found it. It was my hand at 2 in the morning. It was my loft you signed." And that was the moment she saw it land. Saw the whole architecture of his composure take the load and fail. That Silas Pemberton understood he was not in a drawing room making small talk with a recovered invalid. He was in a trap, and it had already closed, and he had walked into it smiling and sat down in it and handed his hat to the housekeeper. He stood up fast. "I don't know what your family's told you," he said, and the charm had curdled into something quicker and meaner. "But you're a sick woman, Miss Abigail. Everyone in this county knows it. You've been shut away for years with your fancies, and if you think anyone will take the word of a—" "Sit down, Mr. Pemberton," said Nathaniel Harrow from the doorway. He'd been there long enough to hear the knot. Abigail knew, because his face told her it had gone past anger into something colder, and more settled the face of a man who has finished deciding and is now simply going to do the thing. Coffee stood at his shoulder with the document case. Clara was behind them, white and steady, and Silas Pemberton looked at the railroad man who'd paid him $11,000 and understood in one more lurch of the failing floor exactly how much of that money he was going to have to explain. "Mr. Harrow." He tried the smile again. It didn't hold. "I'm glad you're here. This poor woman's been—" "I heard you the first time," Nathaniel said. "Sick mad shut-away fancies. I heard your whole line. You've been saying it about her for 2 years. Only you said it about a woman you'd never met whose work you were selling under your own name, and now you're saying it to her face while she tells you where the knot was, and you're finding it doesn't wear so well up close." He came into the room. "Sit down, Silas. There's a party coming like the lady said, and you're going to want to be sitting when it gets here." Silas did not sit. He stood in the middle of the drawing room and looked from Nathaniel to coffee to the plans on the table, and Abigail watched the calculation run behind his eyes, the same calculation she'd watched run behind her father's, and she saw him reach the same place her father had reached and make a faster, uglier choice. He went for the plans. He was quick. He crossed to the table in 2 strides and got a hand on the top sheet, her warehouse original, the ghost lines and all, and had it half off the pile before Abigail was even out of her chair, meaning to what tear it take it, she'd never know, because he never got the chance. Nathaniel Harrow caught his wrist. He didn't wrench it. He didn't strike. He just closed one broad hand around Silas Pemberton's wrist and held it, and Abigail saw Silas try to pull free and fail, and saw the shock of the failure in his face. This man who'd never been stopped at anything in his life, stopped now held by a hand that had built 10 miles of railroad line before it owned a foot of it. "That's not yours," Nathaniel said quietly. "Nothing on that table's ever been yours. Let go of it." Silas let go. "Now sit down," Nathaniel said, and released the wrist before I stop asking. Silas sat, and into that ringing silence at exactly noon came the sound of a carriage in the drive, and Mrs. Wexley's sharp voice in the hall, and the housekeeper's fluster. And then the widow herself sweeping into the drawing room in full sail, and behind her on her arm, moving slow. One hand out, feeling the air, came a very old man in a coat 40 years out of fashion, his eyes clouded pale, his ruined drawing hand trembling where it rested on the young widow's sleeve. Abigail stood up. She had not planned to, but she stood. Because you stood, because some part of her that 8 years of a locked room had not managed to kill, knew that when a robbed man is led into the light, after years in the dark, you get to your feet. "Miss Whitmore." Mrs. Wexley said, "I've brought a friend. This is Josiah Bell. He was my drawing master 50 years ago, and he is the finest hand this county ever produced, and I'll thank everyone in this room to stand when I say so, because he's owed a great deal of standing, and he's had precious little of it lately." Her sharp eyes swept the room and landed hard on Silas. "You may remain seated, Mr. Pemberton. You've stood on this man's shoulders long enough." Josiah Bell turned his clouded eyes toward the sound of the widow's voice, then toward the room he couldn't see, and he said in the thin, uncertain voice of the very old Eleanor, "Where have you brought me, girl? You said there was work." "There's work, Josiah," Mrs. Wexley said, and her voice had gone gentle in a way Abigail wouldn't have believed it could. "But not the kind you think. Sit down here. There's a chair." Here." She guided him into it across the room from his nephew and set his trembling hand on the arm of it and stood behind him with both her hands on his shoulders like a guard. "Now, there's a young woman here I want you to know about. Her name's Abigail Whitmore. She draws. She's been drawing a long time in a room she wasn't let out of, same as you've been drawing in a room you can't see out of, and both of you have had a nephew and a father respectively collecting on your hands. And I've brought the two of you into the same room at last, so this can stop." Josiah Bell was quiet a moment. "Silas," he said, turning his blind face uncertainly toward the chair where his nephew sat. "Silas, are you here? What's she saying? What's this about, boy?" And Silas Pemberton, who had lied to a room full of people for 2 years, who had lied to Nathaniel's face about a knot he'd never seen, who had tried to snatch the evidence off the table, could not for one long moment lie to a blind old man. "Uncle," he said. "Uncle, it's a misunderstanding. They've got hold of a—" "He's been selling your drawings, Mr. Bell," Abigail said. She said it as gently as she'd ever said anything. She had not planned to be the one to tell him. But the old man was turning his blind face back and forth between the voices frightened lost, and she could not stand to let him hang in it, while Silas built another lie. So she crossed the room and knelt down in front of his chair, and took his trembling, ruined hand in both of hers, the same way Clara had taken hers 3 nights ago at the top of the stairs, and she held it. "Mr. Bell, my name is Abigail. I draw like she said, and I'm going to tell you a true thing, and it's going to hurt, and I'm sorry for that. But you've had enough lies, and you deserve the truth in plain words." She held his hand tighter. "Your nephew's been taking the drawings you make the weir, the cottages on the Ashford Road, the mill, and filing them at the county under his own name, and collecting the fees and giving you your board and calling it care. For years. Your hand built half this county's improvements, and another man's name is on every one of them, and another man's got the money. I know because he did the same to me. I know your hand, Mr. Bell. I've been looking at your line work for 2 days. It's the finest I ever saw, even now, even failing, and I'll not sit in a room and let you think those beautiful drawings were charity you owed him for your keep. They were the best work in this county, and they were stolen, and I am so sorry that the person telling you is a stranger on her knees." The old man's clouded eyes had filled. She could see it, the wet, standing in eyes that couldn't see her back. "My weir," he whispered. "On the mill race. I did that one. I did that from memory. I know that water. I fished it as a boy. I asked him, did they like it, and he said—" His voice broke. "He said the board thought it competent. Competent. I sat up 3 nights with my eye the way it is, and he said competent, and took it to town." The old hand turned in Abigail's and gripped hers back sudden and fierce. "Is that what he said to them girl down at the county? Did he tell them it was his—" "Yes, sir. And they praised it to him." "They stamped it," said Mrs. Wexley from behind his chair, her voice tight. "I stamped it myself, Josiah. I sat on the board and admired Mr. Pemberton's handsome weir, and never once knew I was praising you. That's my shame in this, and I'll carry it, and I brought you here today to start paying it back." Josiah Bell sat in the chair blind, his stolen hands trembling, and he turned his face toward the place where his nephew's voice had come from, and when he spoke it was not loud, and it was worse for not being loud. "Silas, come here where I can touch you. Come and let me put my hand on your face, and tell me to my own blind eyes that it isn't true. Come and do that, and I'll believe you over all of them. Come here, boy." Silas Pemberton did not move. "Come here," the old man said again, and his voice cracked down the middle, "and tell me it isn't true." And Silas Pemberton sat in his chair across the room and said nothing because he could not lie to the old man's face, and he could not tell the truth, and the silence he made was the loudest confession anyone in that room had ever heard. Josiah Bell's hand went slack in Abigail's. "Oh," the old man said softly to no one. "Oh, he can't even come across the room to lie to me. That's how I know then. That's how a blind man knows. He can't make his feet do it." He bowed his head. 50 years I taught. I taught half the surveyors in 3 counties. And the one boy I took into my own home, my own sister's grandson, the one I fed at my own table. He waited for my eyes to go, and then he took my hands. He was weeping now openly, the terrible, undefended weeping of the very old. God forgive me, I was proud of him. I told people my nephew had come on so well. I bragged on him, Eleanor. I bragged on the boy who was robbing me because I couldn't see to know. And that broke something in the room that no amount of ledgers and ghost lines could have broken. Clara had turned away with her hand over her mouth. Coffee, the dry gray solicitor, was looking hard at the floor. Even Nathaniel Harrow, who trafficked in acres and iron and did not traffic in feeling, had gone still and white about the mouth. Abigail knelt in front of the weeping old man and held his hand and did not let go, and she looked up past him at Silas Pemberton. And she found she did not have any words left that were angry enough, so she said the only thing that was true. "You made a blind man brag on his own thief," she said. "Whatever else you've done, Silas, the money, the forgery, my sister's settlement, that's the thing you'll answer for longest. You let him love you while you robbed him. You let him be proud." Silas Pemberton stood up. "I'll not sit here and be—" His voice had gone high and cracking. "You've no proof. Sketches and stories and a blind old man's tears, that's what you've got, and I'll not—" "We've the filed plans," Coffee said quietly, opening the case at last. "In your hand. Mr. Pemberton dated and stamped with no working and no corrections, which any examiner will tell you is the mark of a tracing and not an original. We've the ledger in Judge Whitmore's hand showing payment received for those plans. We've Mrs. Wexley of the County Improvement Board prepared to swear the underlying hand is Josiah Bell's, which she has taught and known for 50 years. We've Miss Whitmore's originals with the working lines still under the finished ones, which no man can trace back onto. And we've Mr. Harrow, who paid you $11,000 for a warehouse you did not design." He closed the case. "That's not sketches and stories, sir. That's a case. And I've drawn a good many, and I'd not care to be the man on the other side of this one." Silas looked around the room at the ledger, at the plans, at the widow, at the blind man, at the railroad heir, at the woman on her knees who'd found the knot. And Abigail watched him do the last calculation, the one every cornered man in this house had done. And she watched him arrive somewhere none of the others had. He ran. Not for the door. He wasn't fool enough to think Harrow would let him past. He ran for the table again for the plans, and this time he got both hands on the whole weighted pile and swept them up and turned toward the cold hearth where the summer fire lay unlit, but laid ready, kindling and all. And Abigail understood in one horrified heartbeat what he meant to do. Burn the originals. Burn the ghost lines. Burn the one thing in the case that couldn't be replaced. And she was too far on her knees, an old man's hand in hers. She'd never reach him. Clara reached him. Clara Whitmore, who couldn't draw a straight line, who'd been going to marry this man a week ago, crossed the room faster than anyone and got both her hands on the plans from the other side. And she did not try to pull them away from him, because he was stronger, and she knew it. She did something cleverer. She threw her whole weight backward toward the window, toward the light away from the hearth, and the two of them went down together in a tangle with the plans crushed between them, and Clara screamed, "Not the fire! Anywhere but the fire! Nathaniel, the fire!" And hung on with everything she had while Silas tried to wrench free and drag the whole mess toward the cold grate. Nathaniel got there in 3 steps. He didn't hit Silas either. Abigail would think about that later, that this enormous, cornered, dangerous man never once struck anybody in her house, that he did everything with weight and grip and stillness, and never a blow. He got one arm around Silas Pemberton from behind and simply lifted him clean off Clara and off the plans and set him down 3 feet back and held him there and said close to his ear in a voice Abigail barely heard, "Son, the next thing you reach for in this room, you're going to lose the hand. Now be still." Silas went still. Clara scrambled up with the crushed plans clutched to her chest, breathing hard, her hair come loose, a red mark rising on her arm where he'd grabbed her. And she stood there in the middle of the room, holding 8 years of her sister's stolen work against her heart, and looked at the man she'd almost married with a loathing so pure it silenced everyone. "You'd have burned them," Clara said. "You'd have burned her whole life to save your own skin. I was going to marry you." Her voice shook. I stood in this house a week ago and let Mother measure me for a wedding dress and thought myself lucky, and you'd have put my sister's hands in the fire without blinking. I'll thank God every day of my life that I found out what you were before I gave you my name." She turned to Abigail and her fierce, wet eyes softened. "They're safe. I've got them. Everyone. The ghost lines and all." "I know," Abigail said. "I saw. You saved them." "I saved you?" Clara said. And it wasn't a boast, it was something closer to a vow. Somebody in this family finally did. And that would have been the end of it. The case made, the plan saved. Silas held the old man weeping. The room won, except that the drawing room door opened one more time, and Judge Elias Whitmore came in. He had gotten the word coffee sent. He had had all night to decide while his wife's voice went on through the walls, whether to face the noon or flee it. And here he was at noon in the doorway of his own drawing room facing it. And Abigail understood, looking at him, that her mother's long, unbroken voice in the dark had done something, because the man in the doorway was not the reasonable schemer of yesterday morning, and he was not the cornered animal from the window. He was just old and gray, and finished, a former magistrate come to watch his own bench pronounce on him. And behind him on his arm, this was the thing that stopped Abigail's heart, came her mother. Margaret Whitmore, dressed as if for church. Come to stand in the room when it fell exactly as her daughter had dared her to. "I'll not run," Elias said to the room, to no one, to all of them. His eyes found the blind man in the chair and flinched. "Josiah, I owe you." He stopped. There was no end to that sentence he could say. "I filed them. God help me. I knew whose they were, yours and Abigail's both, and I filed them, and I took the fees, and I told myself it was management. Keeping the family. There's no version of it I can say aloud in this room that doesn't damn me, so I'll not try to dress it. I did it. All of it. And I'll answer for it however the law says, and I was the law, so I know just how much that's going to cost, and I find I don't care anymore." He looked at Abigail. "I locked you in a room for 8 years, and told your sister you were dead, and sold your hands, and this morning I offered you your freedom back if you'd only agree to help me hide that I'd taken it. That was the worst of all of it, I think. Not the locking. The asking you yesterday to be my accomplice in your own burial." His voice broke, an old, proud man's voice, breaking in front of everyone he'd spent his life impressing. "I don't ask forgiveness. I know better. I only came down to say, in front of witnesses before coffee there writes it all up, it was true. Every word she's told you is true. I'll sign it. I'll not make her prove a thing she already lived. Let that be the one decent act of my life, that when the moment came, I didn't make my daughter fight me for the truth." The room was silent, and Margaret Whitmore stepped forward from her husband's side. "And I helped him," she said. Her voice did not shake. She'd used up all her shaking in the dark, apparently. What was left was flat and clear and carrying. "I want that written too, Mr. Coffey. Not just him. Me. I helped lock the door. I told my younger daughter her sister was too dreadful to be seen. I chose it. Not out of loyalty to my husband, I'll not hide behind a wife's duty. I chose it because I'd made myself small the same way once long ago, and I couldn't bear a daughter who wouldn't." She looked at Abigail, and then deliberately at Clara, at Mrs. Wexley, at every woman in the room. "My daughter told me last night it wasn't too late to be brave. She was wrong about the too late. It is too late, decades too late for her, for the 8 years, for the stone in the churchyard. But she was right that I could still do it. So I'm doing it. I helped bury my own child alive to protect a name. Write it down. Let the county have it. Let every mother in it who's ever been tempted to fold away a clever daughter hear that Margaret Whitmore did exactly that, and it cost her everything, and she'd give the whole world to have done otherwise." She lifted her chin. "That's my testimony. I'll sign under his." Son. Abigail sat back on her heels beside the blind man's chair, her father confessing on her left, and her mother testifying on her right, and her sister standing guard over her rescued life in the center of the room. And she found she could not speak, because the thing she'd wanted for 8 years was happening, and it did not feel like triumph exactly. It felt like a funeral, exactly as Clara had said it would. The real funeral, the true one for the family they were supposed to have been. It was Josiah Bell who spoke into it. The old blind man had been listening, the way the blind listen with his whole body. And now he turned his clouded face toward the confessions, toward the judge and his wife. And he said in his thin, failing voice, a thing that landed harder than any of it. "You're all so busy being ruined," he said, "that not one of you has asked the young woman what she wants." Everyone looked at Abigail. "She's the one that was in the room," Josiah said. "Her and me both, but she's the one on her knees on your floor holding a stranger's hand, so it's her I'll ask." He turned his face down toward her unerring blind eyes, finding her by the warmth of her hands on his. "Girl, Abigail, they've all confessed and testified and torn their shirts, and it's fine drama, and the lawyer's got his case. But none of it's for you, is it? It's for them. Their souls, their consciences. So I'll ask the only question in this room that's actually yours to answer." His ruined hand tightened on hers. "What do you want done? Not what the law says, not what they deserve. What do you want that would let you get up off my floor and walk out that door into the sun and never have to come back to this house of the dead? Tell an old blind man. I'll see it's done if I have to draw it myself." And Abigail Whitmore knelt on the drawing room floor, holding the hand of the only other person alive who understood what a locked room does to you. And she found at last that she knew exactly what she wanted, and that it was not what she'd dreamed of for 8 years in the dark. She got to her feet slowly, keeping the old man's hand in hers, and she stood in the center of that room, full of confession and ruin, and looked at all of them. Her broken father, her testifying mother, her fierce sister, the sharp old widow, the still railroad man, the caught forger, and the blind master who'd asked the only right question in 3 days. "I want 3 things," Abigail said. Her voice was steady, and it carried. "And then, I want to leave this house. And I mean it, Mr. Bell. I mean to walk out that front door today and not sleep another night under this roof. And neither will you, if I have any say, because you've slept your last night over that saddler's shop too." "Name them," said Mrs. Wexley. "First." Abigail looked at Coffee. "The money. All of it, the fees for my work and for Mr. Bell's 8 years of it out of my father's accounts and Silas's both. But I don't want it paid to me. I want it put in a trust, Mr. Coffee, that I'll direct to school and pay, and name young women and old men with talent and no voice every hidden hand in this county that's drawing weirs and warehouses by lamplight for somebody else's credit. My father made money by burying talent. That money's going to spend the rest of its life digging talent up. That's the first thing." Coffee was already writing. Second. She turned to her father, and her voice did not soften, but it did not rise either. "I don't want you in prison." A stir went through the room. The judge's head came up stunned. "Not out of mercy, father, out of use. A magistrate in a cell is just a story the county tells for a week and forgets. But a former magistrate who spends what's left of his life bound by law to fund and defend the very thing he tried to bury, who has to sit on this trust and answer to me and to Mrs. Wexley and put his name and his ruined reputation to work, protecting clever women instead of hiding them. That's not mercy. That's a sentence. I want you alive and shamed and working every day at undoing what you did. Prison's too quick. I've had 8 years. You can give me 8 back in service in daylight, where everyone can see the great Judge Whitmore fetch and carry for the daughter he tried to erase." Her jaw set. "Coffee will draw the terms. Silas goes to the law. I've no use for him, and no wish to see him, and he tried to burn my life in that grate, and the county can have him. But my father works off his debt in front of everyone he lied to. That's the second thing." The judge's eyes had filled. He did not speak. There was nothing he could have said. "And the third." Abigail turned last to the blind old man whose hand she still held, and her whole voice changed, gentled, the way it had when she first knelt to him. "Third is that Josiah Bell never files another drawing under another man's name as long as he lives. I want his name on his weir, on his cottages, on his mill, On every beautiful thing he made blind in a room filed correct with the county credited paid, and I want him set up in a proper workroom with good light. He can feel on his face and an assistant to be his eyes. And I'll be that assistant myself if no one better offers, because I owe him, we all owe him a great many stolen years of standing. She looked around the room at all of them. That's the whole of what I want. Not one of you ruined for the pleasure of it. All of you put to work making right the thing you made wrong. Because I've had 8 years to learn what ruin's worth, and it's worth nothing. But a locked door turned into an open workroom that's worth everything. That's the only justice I'll take. Dint! There was a long silence. And then Josiah Bell, blind and weeping and gripping the hand of the young woman who'd just given him back his name, lifted his failing face toward the light. He couldn't see, and said in a voice thick with 50 years of stolen credit, finally coming home, "Eleanor, you said you brought me to a house of the dead." His ruined hand tightened on Abigail's. "You were wrong, girl. You brought me to the only living soul in it." She walked out the front door of Whitmore House that afternoon and did not look back, and it was not as easy as she'd made it sound. She'd said it plain in the drawing room. I mean to walk out that front door today and not sleep another night under this roof, and everyone had heard it as triumph. But when the moment came, when Clara had packed a small case for each of them, and Mrs. Wexley's carriage stood waiting, and Josiah's trembling hand was in the crook of Abigail's arm, she stopped on the threshold of the house that had buried her, and for one terrible breath, she could not make her feet move. "Abby," Clara low at her shoulder. "I don't know how," Abigail said. It came out of her before she could stop it, quiet and shamed. "Isn't that the foolishest thing you ever heard? 8 years I dreamed of walking out this door, and now it's open and there's a carriage and nobody's stopping me and my feet won't go. I've forgotten how to leave a place, Clara. I only ever learned how to stay in one." And it was Josiah Bell Blind who understood. "Course you have," the old man said gently, patting her arm with his ruined hand. "A body kept in one room long enough, the room gets into the legs. Same as me in my dark, I've stumbled at my own threshold 100 times, not because I couldn't find it, but because some part of me stopped believing there was anything on the other side worth the risk of falling." He turned his clouded face toward the open door, toward the summer light he could feel but not see. "So we'll do it together, you and I. 2 prisoners who forgot the way out. You lend me your eyes, and I'll lend you my nerve, for I've had 60 years more practice being afraid, and I've learned it doesn't kill you. On 3. And don't look back at the house, girl. Never look back at a place that ate your years. Look at the light. Even I can feel the light. On 3. On. And on 3 they went, the blind old man and the buried young woman, out the front door of Whitmore House and down the steps into the summer afternoon. And Abigail did not look back, and Clara came behind them with the cases, and the door of that house stood open at their backs, and no one inside came to close it. Mrs. Wexley took them in. She'd offered before they'd even asked, had said it flat in the drawing room. "You'll all come to me. There's 40 empty rooms, and I'm sick of every one of them." And Abigail had meant to refuse out of pride, and had discovered she had no pride left to spend, only tiredness and a blind man on her arm who needed a bed and a sister with nowhere else to go. So they went to Wexley Hall, the 3 of them, and the sharp old widow put Josiah in a ground-floor room with a south window and Clara and Abigail in adjoining chambers upstairs. And that first night, Abigail lay in a real bed, in a real room, with a door she was allowed to open, and could not sleep for the size of it. Clara found her at the window near dawn. "You too," Clara said. "The room's too big," Abigail admitted. "Isn't that mad? I spent 8 years wishing for more than 4 walls close enough to touch, and now there's a room the size of a barn, and I can't rest in it. I keep waking to check the door's still there." "It'll pass," Clara said, and came to stand beside her. "Or it won't, and you'll learn to live with it the way I learned to live with the churchyard. I still can't walk past that stone abbey. Your stone. I take the long way round the church every Sunday so I don't have to see my own sister's grave. Some things the body keeps even after the mind knows better." She leaned her head on Abigail's shoulder. "We're a fine pair. A woman who can't sleep in a big room, and a woman who can't walk past a rock. But we're out. We're both out. That's the thing to hold on to when the small things won't let go. It was Nathaniel who dealt with the stone. Abigail hadn't asked him to. She'd hardly seen him in the 3 days since the drawing room he'd been in town with coffee, filing, deposing, doing the slow, careful legal work of turning a confession into a settlement, and she'd told herself the not seeing was a relief, because it gave her time to not think about the thing her father had planted. The novelty wears off the fear she'd folded away and could not quite keep folded. But on the 4th morning at Wexley Hall, Nathaniel Harrow rode up the drive, and Abigail went out to meet him on the steps, and before she could ask what news from town, he took off his hat and said, "I did a thing without your leave, and I'll understand if you're angry, and I'll undo it if I can, but I couldn't leave it undone once I knew of it." He turned the hat in his hands, the old nervous habit. "Your sister told Coffee about the stone, in the churchyard, with your name on it. And He stopped. "I couldn't stand it, Miss Whitmore. A stone in the ground with a living woman's name and taken young mourned always while you're up at the hall unable to sleep for being alive. So I had it taken up. This morning. Early before service, quiet, no fuss. It's gone. There's fresh turf where it stood and no one need ever know it was there, and your sister need never take the long way round the church again." He looked at her and there was real fear in his plain face that he'd overstepped. "I should have asked. It wasn't mine to move, but I couldn't leave you in the ground one more day, not even in stone. If it was wrong, tell me and I'll bow." "Clara," Abigail said. "Ma'am, you did it for Clara as much as me. You said her name twice." Abigail's voice had gone strange. "You moved my gravestone at dawn so my sister wouldn't have to see it on a Sunday." "Well?" Nathaniel looked at his hat. "She'd mourned you 8 years at a rock. Seemed to me she'd done enough mourning for a woman who's standing right here, and you'd said you wanted every hidden hand in the county dug up." He almost smiled. "Seemed only right to start with yours, even if it was only a stone." And Abigail Whitmore stood on the steps of Wexley Hall and understood with a lurch that frightened her more than the locked door ever had that her father had been wrong. That whatever this was between her and the railroad man, it was not novelty, and it was not a conscience being soothed, and it was not a rich man's passing charity toward a poor caught woman, because a man soothing his conscience does not rise before dawn to move a gravestone. He was never asked about for the sake of a sister he's spoken to twice. That was not novelty. That was a man who had lain awake thinking about the exact shape of her particular grief, and had gone out in the dark to lift it off her before she woke. She did not know what to do with it, so she did what she always did with a thing too large to hold. She turned it into work. "Come inside, Mr. Harrow," she said, a little unsteadily. "Josiah's set up a board in the south room, and he's been waiting on you. We've a canal to finish, and now there's 2 draftsmen to finish it, and I mean to earn every dollar of that trust before I spend a cent of it on anyone else." But her father was not finished, and the county was not finished with the Whitmores, and the first real trouble came from a direction none of them had guarded. It came from the county itself. Word had gone out, of course it had. Mrs. Wexley had brought a blind man to a magistrate's house at noon, and Silas Pemberton had been taken away by the constable that same afternoon, and in a county that size, a thing like that was all over 3 churches by the following Sunday. But the county did not tell the story Abigail had told in the drawing room. The county told a better one, an uglier one, the one people always prefer. The county said the Whitmore girl had gone mad after all. Coffee brought the news grim on the 5th day. "It's being said," he told them gathered in Mrs. Wexley's south room, "that you were shut away for good reason, Miss Whitmore, and that you've come out and destroyed your own father's reputation and ruined an honest architect out of spite and grievance, and that a poor blind old man's been dragged into it and turned against his own devoted nephew by a scheming woman and a widow with a grudge. That's the version in the taverns. Half the county believes it. The half that always believed your father because he was the law, and a man doesn't like to think the law lied to him for 30 years. Easier to think one clever woman went bad than that the whole bench was rotten." The room absorbed it. "So my father wins after all," Abigail said quietly. "Even ruined." even confessed. The story he built for 8 years is stronger than the truth, because the truth asks people to believe they were fooled, and the lie only asks them to believe a woman was wicked. That's about the size of it, Coffee said. And it was Mrs. Wexley who stood up. No, the old widow said. I'll not have it. I have sat on that board 6 years and been the only woman in the room, and I know exactly how this goes. A truth whispered in drawing rooms loses to a lie shouted in taverns every single time. Unless. She turned sharp-eyed. Unless you make the truth impossible to whisper past. You don't fight a tavern story with a courtroom. Coffee, the courtroom's already ours. We've won it, and it changes nothing because nobody drinks at a courthouse. You fight a tavern story by making the truth into an occasion. A thing so public and so undeniable that the taverns have to tell it right or look like fools. Her eyes gleamed. I am giving a dinner. Clara looked up. A dinner. The largest dinner this county has seen in 20 years, Mrs. Wexley said. Every magistrate, every landowner, every investor in Harrow's Canal, every gossiping wife who's been repeating the tavern lie over her needlework. I'll invite the whole rotten pack of them to Wexley Hall, and they'll come because nobody refuses me. They're all too frightened of me and too curious besides. And there in front of all of them, we'll put the truth where it cannot be whispered past. She turned to Abigail. You'll come down those stairs in front of the entire county, girl. Alive. Sane. In a gown I'll have made for you. And Josiah will be at the head of my table in the seat of honor, and Harrow will stand up in front of every investor he's got and say plainly who designed his warehouse and his canal, and I will stand up as a member of the improvement board and say whose hand truly drew every plan this county's stamped for 2 years. And we'll let them look at you. That's the whole weapon. We'll let 400 years of county society look at your living face over the soup and dare them to go back to their taverns and call you mad. Abigail was quiet. They'll come to gawk, she said. Not to believe. They'll come to see the mad Whitmore girl the way they'd come to see a two-headed calf. Yes, Mrs. Wexley said. They'll come to gawk. Let them. A gawker's just a believer who hasn't been shown the truth yet. You give me one dinner, girl, 1 hour of you sitting at my table being nothing but exactly what you are, clever and calm and alive and not sorry, and I'll turn every gawker in that room into a witness. Because there's a thing gossips can't survive, and it's being made to feel they've been cruel to someone who didn't deserve it in public in front of their neighbors. Shame runs uphill faster than any lie. Let me shame them into the truth. And so it was decided, though. Abigail dreaded it more than the drawing room, more than Silas, more than anything since the window, because it asked the one thing 8 years had trained her hardest against. Not to fight, not to prove, just to be seen whole by everyone, and to survive the seeing. But there was a twist waiting in that dinner that none of them planned, and it walked in on the arm of a man Abigail had thought she was finished with. Her father came. Mrs. Wexley had invited him. Of course I invited him. It's his ruin, he ought to attend it, and besides, it'll look worse for him to hide. And Abigail had steeled herself for the sight of him across a crowded room, the confessed and ruined judge come to sit shamed among the people he'd fooled. What she had not steeled herself for was the sight of him walking into Wexley Hall on the 5th night with Josiah Bell on his arm. She stopped dead at the top of the stairs, because Josiah could not see and needed a steady arm, and the man giving him that arm, leading the blind master he'd helped to rob slow and careful across the crowded hall, calling out the steps. Mind the rug here, Josiah. There's a chair to your left, was Judge Elias Whitmore. What is this? Abigail breathed to Clara beside her. I don't know, Clara said. I swear I don't. He came an hour early. He asked Mrs. Wexley if he might make himself useful, and she told him the one useful thing he could do was be Josiah's eyes for the evening, thinking to shame him with it. And he took it, Abby. He's been at the old man's side an hour, fetching him, seating him, describing the room to him. I don't understand it either. Abigail came down the stairs slowly and crossed to where her father was settling Josiah into a chair and stood in front of them, and her father looked up at her. And there was something in his ruined face she had never once seen there in 27 years. He looked ashamed. Not performing shame. Being it. Abigail, he said. He didn't rise. He kept his hand on Josiah's shoulder, steadying the old man. You said I was to work off my debt in service in daylight where everyone could see. I've been thinking on it, and I found I didn't know how to begin. A man doesn't know how to serve when he's spent his whole life being served. So I asked Mrs. Wexley for a task, any task, and she gave me this one, I think, to humiliate me, and she was right to. His voice was low. But it isn't humiliation, Abigail. I sat with him this hour, and he told me about his weir. The one on the mill race. He drew it blind from memory of a river he fished as a boy, and I filed it under another man's name, and never once looked at it. And tonight, he described it to me line by line, and it's the finest thing I ever held in my hands, and I never even saw it. His eyes filled. I've been a magistrate 40 years, and I never once looked at the things I stamped. I looked at the names. That's the whole of my crime, girl. If you want it plain, I spent my life reading names and never once reading the work. And you and this old man made the best work in the county, and I filed your names away and kept the... He stopped, unable to finish. I don't ask forgiveness. I'm only telling you, I'll be his eyes as long as he'll have me. Not for my soul, for his weir. Because somebody in this family ought to finally look at what you both made, and I'm the one who owes it, so it's going to be me. And Josiah Bell, blind, with the judge's hand on his shoulder, said quietly, He's not lying, girl. I can hear a lie now better than I ever saw one, and there's no lie in the man tonight. He's been describing your Mrs. Wexley's terrible portraits to me for an hour and laughing at them, and I haven't laughed in a year. The old man patted the judge's hand where it rested on his shoulder, patted the hand of the man who'd robbed him, and Abigail's breath caught at the terrible grace of it. I'll not tell you to forgive your father. That's between you and God, and I'm too old to meddle. But I'll tell you this, a man who'll be a blind thief's eyes at a dinner meant to shame him. That man's begun something. Whether he finishes it is his own affair, but he's begun. Abigail could not answer. She turned away before they could see her face, and Clara caught her arm, and the dinner began. And it went exactly as Mrs. Wexley had promised, and better. They came to gawk. 400 years of county society magistrates and landowners and investors and needleworking wives. And they came to see the Mad Whitmore girl, and Abigail felt every eye on her as she took her seat. Felt the room lean and murmur, felt herself become the two-headed calf she'd feared. And she did the one thing Mrs. Wexley had told her to do, the hardest thing the thing 8 years had trained out of her. She let them look. She sat at that table and did not shrink and did not perform and did not apologize, and when the landowner's wife on her left asked with poisoned sweetness whether the country air agreed with her. After her long confinement, Abigail set down her spoon and answered plainly in front of everyone in earshot. It's not confinement when there's a lock on the outside of the door, ma'am. That word's for a thing a body chooses. Mine had a key, and I didn't hold it. But the air does agree with me. It's the first I've breathed in 8 years that my father didn't measure out. The wife's face went white. The table went silent. And Abigail picked her spoon back up and ate her soup calm as Sunday and let the silence do her work for her. And she actually watched a dozen gawkers around that table shift in their seats and drop their eyes and begin visibly to be ashamed. It was Mrs. Wexley who rose first when the plates were cleared and rang her glass and stood up in her own hall in front of the whole county. You've come to my table, the old widow said, and most of you have come to look at that young woman and decide whether the story's true, the story that she's mad, that she's spiteful, that she ruined her poor father and an honest architect out of grievance. I know that's why you came, so I'll not pretend otherwise. Well, you've looked at her an hour now. You've heard her answer Mrs. Cabot as steady as any judge on any bench. So let me tell you as a member of this county's improvement board the thing your taverns won't. Her voice rang. For 2 years, every plan this board has stamped as the work of Silas Pemberton was drawn by another hand. Half by that old blind man in the seat of honor whom Pemberton robbed of credit and coin while feeding him at his own table and calling it charity. and half by Miss Abigail Whitmore, drawn from a locked room. She was not let out of filed under Pemberton's name, sold and paid for with her own father's knowledge, which he has confessed, in writing which I have read. She let it land. So, when you go back to your taverns, you may say the Whitmore girl is mad if you like. But you'll be saying it about the woman who designed the Harrow Canal warehouse, the Whitmore River Bridge, the very improvements half of you have praised for 2 years, believing them another man's. You'll be calling that mind mad. And your neighbors who were at this table tonight will know you for a fool who was told the truth over dinner and chose the tavern lie anyway. That's your choice. I've done my part. I've shown you the truth. What you do with it is on your own name now, not hers. And then Nathaniel Harrow stood up. He was not a speech-making man. Abigail could see the cost of it in him, the plain discomfort of a man who did his talking in ledgers, rising to talk in a crowded room. But he stood and turned his hat in his hands one last time, and set it down and spoke. "Most of you know me as the New York man building the canal," he said. "You've taken my money and sold me your timber, and I'm obliged to you. So you'll maybe listen when I tell you a business fact, since business is the one language this whole county speaks fluent." He looked around the table. "I paid $11,000 for a warehouse. I thought I was buying Silas Pemberton's work. I was not. I was buying hers." He nodded toward Abigail. "And here's the business fact. It's the best warehouse I've ever bought in 20 years of buying them. That loft is framed cleverer than any my own New York engineers would have drawn. And I know why now. Because she told me there was a knot in a beam, and she found it, and she redrew the whole thing in a night to keep 6 men from dying under green grain in a rainstorm. Pemberton didn't know the knot was there. He couldn't have. He never designed a thing in his life." Nathaniel's voice hardened. "So, I'll say this plain, as the man holding the purse. I've engaged Miss Whitmore and Mr. Bell both by name, credited, and paid to finish my canal and to design its expansion. Their names go on the plans. Their names go on the keystone. And any man in this county who'd rather do business with a forger than with the 2 finest hands it ever produced, well, he's welcome to. But he'll be building crooked warehouses while I build true ones, and we'll see whose grain's still dry come the first hard rain." He picked his hat back up. "That's my business fact. Take it or leave it. But don't you dare call her mad in front of me again, because I've read her true line, and there's not a mad stroke in it, and I've staked $11,000 and my whole canal on saying so." He sat down, and the county, the gawking, whispering, tavern-lying county, did the thing Mrs. Wexley had promised they would do. They began one table at a time to applaud. Uncertainly at first, then more the shame of the thing turning over into its opposite, the way a held breath turns into a cheer, until the whole hall was on its feet, and Abigail Whitmore sat at the center of it, alive and seen, and not sorry. With her blind master on one side, being applauded for the first time in his long-robbed life, and she understood that Mrs. Wexley had been right, that you could not fight a lie, but you could make the truth into an occasion and drown the lie in it. But the deepest twist of the night came after, when the county had gone home carrying the true story at last, and the hall was quiet, and Abigail found her father alone in the emptied dining room, sitting by the cold hearth, with his head in his hands. They applauded her, Elias said, not looking up, knowing her step. "My daughter." The county stood up and applauded the daughter I told them was dead. He lifted his head, and his ruined face was wet. "Do you know what I felt, Abigail, when they stood? I've asked myself all evening. I thought I'd feel ruin, shame, the end of my name. And I did feel those, but under them," his voice broke, "under them, God help me. I felt proud. I sat in that chair ruined, confessed everything I built in ashes, and watched 400 people applaud the mind I spent 8 years burying, and I felt proud of you. And I've no right to it. That's the cruelty of it. A man doesn't get to bury his daughter for 8 years and then feel proud when the world digs her up. The pride's stolen, too. It's the last thing I stole from you tonight, and I couldn't even help it." Abigail stood very still. She had come in ready for many things, not for this. "You want to know the worst of what you did?" she said slowly. You just found it, Father. It's not the locking. It's not the lying or the money or even Clara's stone. It's that you made it so that when the best thing in my life happens, when a room full of people finally sees me, you get to share in it. You made yourself part of my triumph by being the thing I triumphed over. So I can't even have tonight clean. You're in it. You'll always be in it. Every good thing that ever happens to me for the rest of my life will have you in the shape of it, the shadow I was climbing out of. That's what you took. Not 8 years. All the years. The ones ahead, too. I know, her father whispered. I know it. That's my sentence, isn't it? Not the trust, not the service. This. To be the shadow in every bright thing you ever do, and to know it, and to have earned it. Yes, Abigail said. And then because she was her own woman now, and not his, because she had learned in 8 years the exact difference between the mercy that frees you and the mercy that binds you. Because Josiah Bell had shown her, at his own robber's shoulder, what grace looked like when it cost something. She said the second thing, the harder thing, the thing that was not forgiveness, but was the door forgiveness might someday walk through. But here's what you don't know, Father, because you never looked at the work, only the names. She crouched down in front of his chair, the way she'd crouched in front of Josiah's. A shadow isn't only the thing that darkens. It's also the thing that proves there was a light. Nobody casts a shadow in the dark. You can only be the shadow in my bright things, because there are bright things now. And there are bright things because I climbed out, and I climbed out, because 8 years in a locked room taught me exactly how much I was willing to pay for daylight, which was everything, which was all of it, which was even you. She stood. So yes, you'll be in every good thing I ever do, but not as the master anymore. As the measure, as the exact size of the dark I proved I could climb out of. That's not a mercy, Father, and it's not forgiveness, and don't you dare mistake it for either. It's just the truth. And I've decided I'd rather have you as the truth than as nothing, because I'm done pretending people are dead. I did 8 years of that. I'll not do it to you, even though you did it to me. That's the whole difference between us in the end. You buried a living daughter, and I'll not bury a living father, however much easier it'd be. Now dry your face. Josiah wants his eyes, and you're on duty. She left him there and did not look back and went to find the old blind man, and behind her, in the empty dining room, her father sat a long moment, and then wiped his face and rose, and went to do the one useful thing his ruined life had left him, to be the eyes of the man whose eyes he'd helped to close. And out in the south room, where the good north light would come in the morning, 2 drawing boards stood side by side, one set low for a blind man's failing hands, and one at a working height. And on the working board, weighted flat and waiting, was a fresh sheet, the first sheet of the canal expansion. Blank, unstarted, with a single line, already ruled down the right-hand margin in Abigail Whitmore's own hand, where the load table would go, in her own name, that no one would ever again make her hide. The canal took the better part of 2 years to finish, and in that time a great many things were built, and not all of them were made of stone. The work itself was the easy part, or the easiest. Abigail and Josiah drew side by side in the south room, through 2 autumns and 2 winters. The blind master and the buried woman and Abigail learned more in those 2 years, standing at the old man's shoulder, than she'd learned in 8 alone with a lamp, because Josiah had been taught, had a whole grammar of the craft in his failing hands, that she'd only ever guessed at from books, and he poured it into her the way a dying man pours out a fortune, urgently, gladly wanting it spent before he went. He'd sit with his clouded eyes shut and describe a truss aloud, stress by stress, and she'd draw it as he spoke, and it became a kind of language between them, his voice and her hand, one mind working through 2 ruined instruments made whole by being joined. You draw better'n me now, Josiah told her one morning near the end. You've had it a year, and I say it plain. Whatever I had to give, it's give. You're the finest hand in this county, girl, and I'm the second, and that's the right order of it, and I'm not sorry to be second to you. A teacher that dies, still the best of his pupils, taught nobody anything. I taught you past me. That's the whole of what a teacher's for. And Abigail, who did not weep easily anymore, had to set down her pencil. Nathaniel came and went through those 2 years to New York for his shareholders back to Virginia for the work, and every time he came back, Abigail told herself she was glad only for the sake of the canal, and every time she knew a little better that she was lying. And neither of them said the thing because both of them were the kind of person who did not say a thing until they were certain of it. And certainty for two people so badly taught about their own worth came slow. It was the trust that nearly undid it. Coffee had drawn the terms exactly as Abigail asked the 8 years of stolen fees her father's and Silas's both placed in a fund she directed to school and name and pay hidden hands. And within the first year, the trust had done a thing Abigail hadn't foreseen. It had found others. Not one or two. A dozen then, a score clever daughters, folded away, poor draftsmen robbed of credit. A widow in the next county who'd run her dead husband's whole surveying practice for years under his name and gone destitute when he died because not one commission was in her own. A whole buried population of talent. The county had never counted surfacing now because there was at last a place to surface to. And it was work. Enormous consuming work. Abigail poured herself into it the way she'd once poured herself into the drawings because it was safer than the other thing. The thing about Nathaniel she wouldn't look at. And one night, Clara sat her down and said so to her face. "You're hiding in the trust," Clara said, "the way you used to hide in the paper. I watched you do it 8 years through a shutter, and I know the look, Abby. You've built yourself a new locked room, only this one you built yourself, and you call it good works, so nobody can tell you to come out." "That's not—" "He's leaving Thursday," Clara said. "For New York. For a month, maybe 2, he told Josiah. And you're going to let him go without saying it, and you're going to fill the empty with more trust. Business, more hidden hands, more good works, and you'll call it purpose. But it's the shutter, Abby. It's the same shutter. You're watching your own life go by from behind a pane of glass, because the glass feels safer than the yard." Her voice gentled. "Father told you a thing that stuck. Novelty wears off. He'll forget your name by Christmas. You never let it go. I've watched it sit in you 2 years. And you've decided the way to never be hurt by it is to never test it, to stay behind the glass where he can't leave you, because you never let him close enough to." Abigail was silent a long time. "What if he's right?" she said very low. "Father, what if I say it and cross the yard, and it was only novelty, and I've thrown my own heart after 8 years of everything else I threw? Then you'll have loved somebody and lost," Clara said, "which is a thing free women get to do and prisoners don't. You want to know the difference between the room Father built you and the one you're building now? Father's had a lock. Yours has a door that opens from the inside, and you just won't walk through it. That's not safety, Abby. That's just a nicer cell. And I didn't pull those plans out of Silas's hands and give up my own name and my own settlement so my sister could spend her freedom hiding in a fund from the one man who ever moved a gravestone at dawn so I wouldn't have to see it." Clara took her hand. "Go cross the yard. If it's novelty, you'll survive it. You've survived worse than a broken heart, God knows. But if it's not, and you let him ride to New York without a word, you'll have done to yourself the exact thing Father did to you. You'll have buried a living thing to keep from risking it. And I can't watch you do that. I mourned you at a stone once. I'll not mourn you at a drawing board." Abigail went to find him the next morning. He was in the south room alone, bent over the last sheet of the canal plans, and she stood in the doorway and watched him a moment. This plain, careful man who turned his hat when he was nervous and moved gravestones before dawn, and stood up in a crowded room to stake $11,000 on her true line, and she found that the thing she'd been afraid to look at for 2 years was not after all so hard to look at once she let herself. It was only love. It had been love for a long time. The fear had never been of the love. The fear had been of wanting a thing and having it taken, because everything she'd ever wanted had been taken, and she'd taught herself in a locked room that wanting was the door that only opened onto grief. "Mr. Harrow," she said. "Miss Whitmore." He didn't look up right away. He finished the line he was ruling, careful the way he did everything. Then he set the pencil down and turned. "You're up early. I've a thing to say, and I've been 2 years not saying it, and I find I can't watch you ride to New York without it, so I'll say it plain and badly, and you'll have to bear the badness of it." Her heart was going hard. "My father told me you'd tire of me, the first day. He said I was a novelty to you, a conscience you were soothing, and that the day my name was a liability instead of a curiosity, you'd cut me loose and finish your warehouse with any draftsman that'd take the fee. And I've carried that 2 years. I've let it keep me behind the glass. Every time you rode away, I told myself this is the time he forgets best not to have wanted him, and every time you rode back, I felt a fool for the wanting and hid it deeper." She made herself hold his eyes. "But I'm done hiding in the trust, and I'm done letting my father's voice pick who I let close, and I'm done pretending I don't want a thing I've wanted since you took your hat off in a locked room and called me by my name. So here it is. I don't want you to go to New York without knowing that I love you, Nathaniel Harrow. And if it was only ever the canal for you, if my father was right, then tell me now and I'll bear it, because I've borne worse. And I'd rather bear a true no than keep guarding myself against a maybe. But I couldn't let you ride off with it unsaid one more time. That's all. That's the whole of it." For a moment, Nathaniel Harrow did not move. Then he crossed the room, and he took both her ink-stained hands in his, and Abigail saw that this careful, unshakable man was for the first time since she'd known him not steady at all. 2 years, he said. 2 years I've come and gone and told myself I mustn't say it, because you'd been owned by men your whole life, locked and sold and buried. And the last thing on this earth you needed was another man coming along to want you. Like you were a thing to be wanted, when what you needed was to be free. His voice was rough. "I thought the kindest thing I could do was give you your name and your work and your freedom, and not ask for anything back, because every man in your life had asked something back, and I swore I'd be the one that didn't. So I've stood at that board 100 mornings with you an arm's length off in love with you so bad I could hardly rule a straight line, and I said not one word because I thought loving you quiet was the only decent way left to love you." He laughed unsteady. "And here you are telling me you spent the same 2 years thinking I'd tire of you. God, we're a pair of fools, the both of us. You behind your glass, and me behind my manners. Two people so bad taught about their own worth that we near loved each other into the grave being noble about it." "Then it wasn't novelty," Abigail said. "Novelty." He said the word like it disgusted him. "Abigail, I have loved you since you asked me why king posts and not queen, and answered it yourself before I could, and I understood I was standing in front of the best mind I'd ever meet, and it had been locked in an attic and called dead. Novelty wears off. This," he pressed her hands, "this is the opposite of novelty. This is the thing that got truer every single time I rode back and found you still there, still drawing, still exactly and impossibly yourself. Your father was wrong about everything, but he was wrongest about that. You're not a novelty, you're the true line. I told the whole county so over the soup. I'd stake my whole canal on you, I said. And I meant the canal, and I meant the rest of it too, and I've been waiting 2 years for the nerve to say the rest of it out loud." He took a breath. "So let me say it since we're being fools who say things now. I don't want a draftsman, Abigail. I've got a draftsman. She's the finest in Virginia, and I pay her handsome, and her name's on every plan, and that's a settled business matter that's got nothing to do with what I'm about to ask." His voice steadied the careful man, finding his feet on the one ground he was sure of. "I want to marry you, not to have you. God knows not to keep you. I'd sooner cut off my own hand than put you behind another door. I want to marry you the way two people who build things together get married as partners, full credit, full name, full authority. The way I offered you the contract, only this time I'm offering you my life along with it. You can say no. You've every right in the world to want no man at all after what men have done to you, and if that's your answer, I'll take it and be your partner at that board till we're both old and never say another word. But I had to ask. I've watched you claim everything they stole from you one thing at a time, and I couldn't bear for the one thing you never claimed to be the thing you actually wanted. So, Abigail Whitmore, will you have me? And Abigail, who had broken a window to be seen and knelt to a blind man to free him, and crossed a yard at last, to say a true thing, stood in the south room, with her hands in Nathaniel Harrow's, and found the whole 8 years fall away. And what was left underneath was not the prisoner, and not the buried girl, and not the trust's tireless director, but simply a woman free in love being asked. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll have you. On the terms you said and no others, partners, both our names, and you never once asked me to disappear into it." Yes. He kissed her then, in the good north light over the last sheet of the canal plans. And it was the first thing in 8 years Abigail Whitmore had wanted and gotten clean, with no shadow in the shape of it. And she found her father had been wrong about that too. That some bright things, if you fight hard enough and long enough for the daylight come to you with no darkness in them at all. But the story was not quite done, and the last turn of it came from the person Abigail had least expected to give her anything, her mother. Margaret Whitmore had not come to Wexley Hall in the 2 years. She'd stayed at the emptied Whitmore house alone, but for 2 servants, while her husband spent his days being a blind man's eyes and his ruined name slowly publicly working off its debt on the trust's board under his own daughter's direction. Margaret had done neither. She'd simply gone quiet, not the cold quiet of before, but the quiet of a woman who did not know what a person was once the performance was over, and there was no name left to protect. She came to the wedding uninvited and stood at the back, and Abigail saw her there and nearly did not go to her and then went. "I didn't think you'd want me," Margaret said. "I near didn't come, but I found I couldn't not. A mother gets to watch her daughter married. I thought even a mother like me, even from the back, even if nobody's glad to see her. And then I thought, no. That's the old thinking. That's I get to. I've spent my whole life on what I get to. So I came to give a thing instead. If you'll take it, and if you won't, I'll understand and go." She held out a small worn book. "It's mine, from when I was a girl. The accounts I told you about, the ones I did for my father from the age of 10. I kept the ledger, all these years, my own hand, my own figures, the one proof left in the world that I was ever the clever girl I told you about the night before it all came down." Her voice trembled. "I want you to have it for your school. I heard you mean to open one for girls in drafting and figures and the things they lock us away for knowing. Put my ledger in it, not with my name on it, if you'd rather. I've no right to my name in a place like that. But let some girl someday see that a woman kept these figures 200 years ago and hid them in a drawer her whole life because there was no door, and let that girl know that now there's a door. That's all I have to give you, Abigail. The proof of the clever girl I buried in myself before I ever buried you. Take it for the school. Let my cowardice be worth one thing before I die." Abigail took the book. She opened it and looked at her mother's girlhood hand. Quick, sure, clever, a hand that could have drawn or built or surveyed or done any of 100 things. There'd been no door for running column after column of figures done at 10 years old and hidden for 50 years in a drawer. And she understood at last and completely the whole shape of the thing that had locked her in the East Wing. It had not started with her father. It had not even started with her. It went back and back, mother to mother, every clever girl in every generation taught to bury the best of herself before it ruined her, until one of them, until Abigail had refused and broken a window and let the light in on all of it. "I'll take it," Abigail said, "and I'll put your name on it. Margaret Whitmore, age 10, in the front of the school where every girl will see it." Her voice was thick. "Not to shame you, Mother, to finish it. You buried your clever girl and helped bury mine, and the only way that ends, the only way it ever ends, is if we stop burying them and start naming them, all of them, the living and the dead, and the ones who buried themselves. So, your name goes up. The clever girl you were gets her door at last 50 years late in a school full of girls who'll never have to hide their figures in a drawer. That's not forgiveness either. But it's the door forgiveness might walk through someday. And I've decided I'd rather leave the door open than closed even to you. Especially to you. Because if it doesn't open for the woman who helped lock me in, then it was never really about the door at all. It was just about revenge. And I've had my fill of that family trade." Margaret Whitmore put her face in her hands and wept at the back of her daughter's wedding, and Abigail put an arm around her mother's shaking shoulders. The woman she'd feared her whole life. The woman who'd knelt Clara at a stone and held her and did not forgive her and did not have to, because holding was its own thing, older and simpler than forgiveness. And it would have to be enough, and it was. The keystone of the Harrow Canal warehouse was set in the spring, 2 years to the season. From the summer, Abigail broke the window. The whole county came, the ones who'd gawked, and the ones who'd applauded, and the ones who'd carried the tavern lie and been shamed out of it, and the trust's dozen rescued hands, and Josiah Bell in the seat of honor with Judge Whitmore at his shoulder, describing the stone to him line by line, and Clara and Mrs. Wexley, sharp and satisfied, and Margaret at the back where she chose to stand. And the engraved keystone when they hoisted it into place, read in letters deep enough for a blind man to feel, architects of record Josiah Bell and Abigail Harrow. Nathaniel had asked her to marry him in that south room private over the plans, and he asked her one thing more in public that spring day, in front of the whole county, at the keystone. Not a possession and not a claim, but the only question that had ever mattered between them. "Will you live in this country you helped build?" he said loud enough for all of them to hear, "and keep drawing every room the world once tried to lock you out of?" And Abigail Harrow, standing in the sun with her name cut deep in the stone above her, said, "I will. Every room, every last one, until there's not a locked door left in this whole county that a clever woman can't open from the inside." The school opened the following year. She ran it herself, drafting mathematics estate design, surveying every locked-away art, and Josiah taught there until his hands finally failed for good. And then he sat and talked the craft into the girls, the way he'd talked it into Abigail, his voice in their hands, until the morning. He didn't wake, and they buried him under a stone that said in his own Weir's honest letters, he drew true, and at the last was named. Judge Whitmore kept the school's accounts to his dying day in daylight, under his daughter's eye, working off a debt that could never quite be worked off, and knowing it and doing it anyway, which was the closest thing to grace a man like him could reach. Clara married eventually a man who was glad of her iron, and never once took the long way round the church again, because there was no stone there anymore to avoid. And Margaret's ledger hung framed in the front hall of the school. Margaret Whitmore, aged 10, the first clever girl of that family to be named at last, so that every girl who entered saw before anything else the proof that the burying could stop. In Abigail's own house, the one she and Nathaniel built together, both their names on the plans, no workroom ever had a lock on the outside of a door. No daughter was ever hidden for being clever. No face was ever treated as a shame, and no mind was ever treated as a danger. And the east wing door of that house, the workroom door, stood open, always propped with the same brass candlestick she'd once thrown through a window to be seen. She kept the candlestick her whole life. Girls at the school would ask about it, the strange dented brass thing propping the workroom door, and Abigail would tell them the truth, all of it, the locked room and the window and the drawing on the thread and the man who caught it, and then she'd hand them a pencil and say the things she'd learned in 8 years of the dark and 30 of the daylight after. They locked her away to hide her face, but the face was never the scandal, and the scandal was never hers. The scandal was a world so frightened of a woman's mind that it would bury her alive to keep from seeing it work. And that world was ending one open door at a time in a school full of unhidden girls with pencils in their hands. And Abigail Harrow had built it, drawn it, named it, and set the keystone herself.